What up, vigilantes? Guys, I've told you many times to look where they don't want you to look, to be a rebel, to don't conform to what other people tell you. And, you know, I have to be honest. There are things in crypto that matter that unfortunately are being suppressed that other people don't want to talk about. Right now, there is about to be a huge event in crypto history, and there is a complete media blackout. Why? I don't know. What I do know is that at the Crypto Vigilante, we focus on those things which are most radical, right? We talk about privacy coins because at the end of the day, those are amazing weapons that we have against tyranny. Okay. There's also a project started by Satoshi Nakamoto himself, which is Bitcoin's original design at scale, of which I've been a fan of since day one, where I understood Bitcoin's original design to be much more than a store of value, much more than just cash. When I fell in love with Bitcoin, I saw it as the means by which we can all entrepreneur with one another, where we all leverage off one another's work, entrepreneurship, businesses, where I've always seen Bitcoin as the only place in all of crypto where there is an actual meritocracy of value. So I was having a conversation about this recently with Hotep Jesus on this channel. And he asked me a very kind of key question. You know, is BSV as an experiment something to be considered worthy only from a philosophical perspective or as an actual existent reality that is changing the world? And I'm like, well, it's an existing technology that is there for the taking. And then his follow-up question was, show me an actual product that actually is unique in itself within BSV. And with all honesty, I told him, look, man, what we have right now, for the most part, are minimal viable products of applications that mimic those that are most popular in the internet. For example, online gaming and social media like Twitch. So has there been a killer application that completely has completely changed everything in the whole game? No, it has not. But no, it has not come out on BSV. I can't see that it has. Otherwise, everyone would be talking about it right now. What we do know is that there's a contingent makeup of Bitcoin's original design that allows us to do things that you can't do anywhere else in crypto, that allows us to engage the market in ways that we can't in other cryptocurrencies, because the economic incentives are aligned via proof of work and a network topology that is truly unmatched. Like what Satoshi created, in my opinion, is something marvelous. What I see in Bitcoin, guys, and I take this as a disclaimer, the rest of my team really don't see it. The vast majority of my team, the Crypto Vigilante, and I love them and I respect them for that, because if I'm wrong in this assessment, they got my back and they have your back. Okay. And their assessment is that Satoshi's original design and intent was for it to be a privacy coin, in the ultimate medium of exchange, and for them that has been manifested in the form of Monero. I respect that. Okay, we have Monero in the market competing. We now have Bitcoin Cash and BTC as an attempt to turn Bitcoin's original design into something like Monero, or with Monero-like features. But if you look at Bitcoin in its original design by itself, and you just see it as a standalone technology, I think it's at least a worthy experiment for us to, keep an eye on in the market, because like myself, Kurt Wuckert Jr., who's also an OG Bitcoiner, and, we've been friends for quite some time. He also came to these conclusions on his own. And he actually, made the same journey that I did. We didn't know each other. We were just Bitcoiners that found ourselves in Bitcoin Cash. And then once Bitcoin Cash started to become what we would consider, a core group of central developers that wanted to change the code and the evolution of Bitcoin to their liking. We were like, wait a minute, we have to respect Bitcoin in its original design as a protocol that cannot be changed, that has to be fixed and stable for us to really have a stable playing field and stable rules of the game for all of us to jump in as entrepreneurs and really build upon having the miners as the back end of our business. So Kurt, welcome to the show. There's a lot to talk about here, a lot of things that no one else is talking about. And the real reason why I brought you on board is because I hate censorship. I hate it so much, man. I hate it so much. And even if, let's say, those that are against BSV are correct, there should not be a reason for there to be a media blackout. Welcome, Kurt. Nice to have you.
Good to be here, Raph. That's a long setup, my friend. So it's funny.
Big setup. I just can't keep myself from talking about which I think matters. You know what I mean?
Right. For sure.
And my job is to be genuine and as objective as possible. Yeah. That's my job.
No, and I appreciate that about you. I always have. You speak your mind and you don't censor yourself based on the audience in front of you either. And I think that's crucial. I think that says a lot about you, and hopefully, says a lot the same, to me. I could be an influencer in any other, blockchain space if I wanted to, I suppose. But instead, I chose to stand up for the least popular currency in the entire space, much like you have. And, it kind of is what it is from a, looking in hindsight as to like, well, how much money would I have made if, but that's not really the point, because Bitcoin was not designed to be an investment asset. The store of value aspect, for one, is very different than the investment aspect of an asset. Store of value and investment value are two very different things. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. And I think people need to be very clear with themselves as to why they're in the space at all in the first place. I mean, if you're just a raw, cold investor trader type and you're here to raise your portfolio value, okay, that's very cool. Like whatever, go trade, go trade Solana and go ride up, try to hit up every NFT and everything that you can and make a bunch of money. I have no problems with that. If I was a big advocate for like wind energy or something, but I believed that like the coal industry was going to absolutely explode and make some big money, I'd be buying and trading coal. Like that's, there is nothing wrong with treating your portfolio very shrewdly. And in fact, it gives you the firing power to be able to do what you actually want to do with your time and your money and your advocacy. But Bitcoin was designed to solve a bunch of very specific things, but the real undergirding of it all is that killer app like Hotep Jesus is looking for is micropayments. Nobody's talking about micropayments, truly. I mean, people give it a little bit of lip service, but micropayments that are secured by proof of work is what matters most, and you'll get the small blocker maxis. You'll say, well, what about Lightning Network? That's even, and it's like, no. That doesn't get the proof of work. So you are treating it as a second class Satoshi, right? Each one of those sats is not being treated like it matters. Like, nah, that one doesn't need proof of work. And that's bullshit right there. Like, every Satoshi really does matter. And so every Satoshi deserves to be transacted with proof of work. And they deserve to be transacted in such a way that there is something valuable truly attached to it. And so...
Yeah, right away they would say, Kurt, stop right there. We need privacy on Bitcoin. Therefore, we need the second layer in order for it to be private. And that's where I step back and I'm like, wait a minute. If you really want privacy, you need real privacy. And on the base layer, the first layer, you can't have privacy on any Bitcoin protocol the way you desire it to be, right? You need to start from scratch. You need to have something like the crypto note protocol. You need to have Monero. And that's why I like about people from Monero, that They have the same BTC logic, but they actually take it. They're agorist about it. They just don't talk about it. They live it now. They're living it right now.
Oh, for sure. I respect Monero. I was a big Monero fan back in the day. I was a Monero miner in I think it was 2015 through like mid 2017. And, you know, Monero had the big bull run just like everything else. It went from like, I don't even know, $15 at the beginning of the year up to like $350 or something by the end of 2017. I got out of all my Monero, largely because of what was being discussed, like getting rid of GPU miners. So it was the proof of work, like it shouldn't be competitive. We're going to hard fork it and make sure that only, I forget the name of the protocol that they use now for their algorithm, the one that makes it ASIC and GPU resistant and everything, and basically keeps it CPU. RandomX. So they switched to RandomX. And that's all well and good. I actually think RandomX is really good technology. I just don't like the way that they're like, well, we're going to get rid of the original Monero, and whatever the devs and the exchanges say is the real Monero is the real Monero. I think that's a really, really bad precedent to set.
Well, they must do that because they're not Bitcoin, right? Their idea is to be as private as possible.
Yeah, sure.
They use a different logic, which is their meritocracy is the false ethos, right? The meritocracy of Bitcoin is proof of work. And BSV is the only place where you have pure proof of work, in my opinion.
Well, and governance by proof of work. That's the real thing. Exactly. So like when we talk about proof of work, people are like, well, BTC clearly has more proof of work. And it's like, yes, but they don't do anything with it. It's like saying, like, oh, I have a really big, peacock tail, but it's not connected to me. It's like, I leave it in the closet, and it's like, well, there is no costly signal there. Like you just have the thing. You're not showing the handicap of bearing it at all times, right? And so BSV allows itself to be governed by pure proof of work. It is the sole governance model, and that's what really makes BSV unique as an implementation of the Bitcoin protocol. Is that in Bitcoin Cash and in Bitcoin Core, there's the BIP system, or Bitcoin Cash, I think they call it the chip system, which is here's how we're going to improve our Bitcoin fork, and then we're going to vote on it, and then there's GitHub gatekeepers, and then once the gatekeepers pass it, then there's a flag day, and all the nodes get to vote on the flag, and it's like, okay, so you have a social democracy by technical means. Like you are just using democratic socialism to determine the state of the protocol on whatever basis, by soft fork or hard fork or whatever, but you guys are voting on how to change what you allege to be a hard money. And let me tell you, you are not a hard money. You are not a sound money unless your money is identical. It must be the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. If the gold in your pocket turned to lead because a bunch of people voted for it to be lead, you would say that gold is a fiat currency, right? And so this is a major, major problem here. And people will argue, yeah, but the leadership in BSV and whatever. And I understand those criticisms, but what they have done, the leadership in the BSV space, is they have divorced themselves from governance. And they have said that governance is by the proof of work nodes, the nodes that build blocks, validate Bitcoin rules by proof of work, by building on other valid blocks. And that is the entire governance model. And it's the only, as far as I know, it's the only blockchain on the planet. I don't know of any other. No, there's not any
proof
other.
of work.
Every other is a dev technocracy. Exactly. There's some lead developer who just says, this is what we're going to do next. Right. And then
correct.
That you form your coalitions, and it works just like a social democracy.
And some are justified. I think privacy coins are justified in being that way because privacy coins, they have a necessity to always remain as private as possible. That's why there is an ethos to hard fork with, like, for example, Monero. That's understood. But whereas when we talk about Bitcoin solves a bigger problem. And the reason why I champion Bitcoin's original design is because I always saw Bitcoin as the only thing that can really unseat big tech. And this is a huge deal.
Sure.
And no one in crypto really is tackling this situation right here.
No.
Some of them want to, and some of them have that desire, Kurt, because I see it happening with Filecoin, SIA, all these databases, IPFS. Dude,
sure.
Satoshi solved that already. There is an inherent system based on the network topology of Bitcoin that allows you to have the incentives to have a meritocracy where the miners themselves become the competitors of big tech. That is huge. That's the reason I'm talking to you, literally, because it matters so much. It matters so much to the world that we have a pure proof of work blockchain, a blockchain where we actually have an opportunity to compete with Google, to compete with Amazon. Nothing else does that. Nothing else does that. And so it's mind-boggling to me how people, and we're going to have to talk about uncomfortable things in this conversation that I know everyone wants to talk about, but it's important to look at things for yourself and not just get carried away by the ad hominems. And that's why I don't see us anywhere else, Kurt. I do not see anywhere else where humanity has an opportunity to compete with big tech. I don't see it anywhere else. And that's why I'm talking to you right now.
It doesn't exist, and this Satoshi talked about these things. People like to act like Satoshi didn't have opinions about smart contracts and tokens, and he talked about these things. He talked about websites being fueled by tokens, and he talked about pay to send email and things like this that could be bootstrapped on top of Bitcoin. And he very much saw the problems of Google and Facebook and some of these things as they were just creeping up at the time. This is the 2006 to 2008 era where Satoshi was developing Bitcoin. He was looking at the advent of some of these things that have become these behemoth drains on privacy and this constant Sybil attack on your mind, And so
Explain that a little bit. Explain that a little bit.
So a Sybil, let's just talk about what a Sybil attack is real quick. It's when a nefarious actor controls a bunch of things that are intended for you to feel like are independent, but they aren't. They're controlled by a single entity. So a good example of this would be
hub and spokes network, right?
Yeah, correct. But a good example of this is like in the 2016 presidential campaign. Everybody's, it's just a handful of Russians that are running a bunch of fake Facebook groups that make you think that Donald Trump is the right guy to vote for and all of that. And so, and some of that could be true, but that would be an example of a Sybil attack. Like a dozen Russian guys that are running Facebook groups that are full of tens of thousands or hundreds, maybe millions of people that are all discussing these weird political issues. We've even had similar conversations about, like, is the pro-vax or the anti-vax movement the product of a foreign Sybil attack on the United States in order to cause, bioterrorism, for us to bioterrorize ourselves, right? So if you're, let's just assume you're anti-vax, right? So then the assumption is okay, why wouldn't China spin up a bunch of pro-vaccination propaganda on the internet to get people to say, oh, here, my kid died, I really wish I got vaccinated? Because when you keep hearing that's the Sybil attack on your mind. That's the, I need to do something different in order to survive. But you don't even realize it's not Shelley from Dearborn, Michigan saying this. It is a dude in China who is being paid by the Communist Party to create propaganda to make you think that you need to do it. And this is the exact same. This is actually a problem that Bitcoin was designed to solve. So this is the Byzantine general's problem. The Byzantine general's problem is I don't know, I would trust the general if I could speak to him because I know him. We went to the academy together. We've been fighting in wars together for 20 years, but I have to trust a writer. I have to trust the guy who is bringing me a letter that alleges to be from my partner general. And we need to conquer this city, but I can't trust that the writer isn't a spy or that maybe the writer grabbed the wrong letter. I don't know. And so that writer could be a Sybil. And Bitcoin solves this with proof of work. If that writer showed up with the letter and the letter had the amount of proof of work you would expect from the general on the other end of it, you could say, okay, this has been transacted to me across an adversarial channel, but I can trust the information here because the letter solved the hash before it got to me. And this can be done with all information, all data in the world, every Facebook group or every time you see, vaccine propaganda or whatever it is, if there was a chunk of proof of work associated to it that said, you know what, Shelley from Dearborn really is Shelley from Dearborn, and she solved it by doing all these different, maybe it's Daniel Krawitz's boost power, maybe it's 21E8 or some kind of data aggregation, brute forcing, proof of work, hard computation that says, this is real information. This is something that actually occurred. Shelley from Dearborn, her kid really did have a vaccine reaction, Or her kid really did die from COVID-19 and maybe would have been saved by some other therapy. And so Bitcoin allows you to connect money to data and then have both of those things get brute forced to make sure that the data that is associated to it has at the very least passed the test of saying, I am willing to be vetted by the world. I am willing to put myself out in public and have the entire world have the opportunity to prove that I am false. And therefore, if I'm proven right, at the very least, I'm right enough to solve the problem that I allege to be solving. And everybody's ignoring it. Everybody's ignoring that use case. And it's like, imagine if you could actually trust the data that you get on the internet. I mean, that's everything. Like this even solves political parties. Like we don't need politics anymore if proof of work is associated to all information in the world. It allows us to say, what is the aggregate real data? And then make a decision. Who are my enemies? Who are my friends? What are my risks? What is my potential to succeed? All of these things can be vetted by proof of work.
So, yeah. So in other words, Bitcoin, the way I understood it always was that Bitcoin is a truth machine. And there was always a desire for there to be a privacy coin. And the way that I assess the whole space is that those that really wanted a privacy coin realized that they had to start from scratch. That's why we have Monero. So there's so much tied into what BSV is, and that, we can't escape the name of Craig Wright. I've honestly, I don't care about Craig Wright personally. Someone's identity is none of my business. It's someone's private property. Now, there is a court case happening that is about to start on November 1st that no one is talking about. And that's why I invited you on the show, because it pissed me off. I'm like, what? No one's talking about this? I don't see this anywhere. This is the biggest, what is it? The biggest IP lawsuit in the world, world history.
It is the biggest private intellectual property lawsuit in the history of the world. It's worth about $65 billion and nobody's covering it.
No one in crypto's covering it. So it's like, okay, wait a minute. I come from the world of venture capital and private equity. And right away, I learned a big lesson that the general partners and the companies that you see, the faces that you see, are not really the ones that call the shots. The ones that call the shots are the general partners, not the general partners, the limited partners. Those actually, are tied by the term sheet, and they literally invest in accordance to what was promised by those who are managing these funds. Same thing goes for the companies. To me, Silicon Valley was always a giant leviathan that manipulated innovation till we got Bitcoin. And so when we got Bitcoin, for me, it was Bitcoin became a way to free humanity in the realm of innovation. When I was part of the Bit Angels network, the big issue that I had was that people kept coming up with new blockchains for this, new blockchains for that. And my argument was always, hey, wait a minute, we can leverage off one another's success in Bitcoin, use one single unit of account, not have to give into a coupon economy, and use the Bitcoin miners as the back end of our business. Like, I understood from the get-go that everything people wanted to do with like Ethereum was always possible with Bitcoin. I was one of those people that was like, why even, there's no reason to have an Ethereum. To me, Kurt, Ethereum was the first like Bitcoin civil war, in my opinion, in my eyes.
Sure.
Because I saw so much energy go there, and people were told, if you want to build a smart contract, go to Ethereum. And I'm like, wait a minute, we can do it here. And that's when it really started. We really started to have a civil war.
Major brain drain. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we have, so why don't you tell us, everyone in this world has already heard the main story and the narrative of Fake Toshi and Craig Wright.
Yep.
I took a free stance away from it, and let me tell you my story, my personal experience with it, which was this. Jeff Berwick one day told me, Raph, there is this awesome startup in I've been in conversations with this awesome CEO from Kenya, from Africa, and I want to learn more about this technology. Would you please speak to his CTO? And I was like, okay, cool, Jeff. Yeah, I'll do that. What's the name of the CTO? Oh, his name is Ian Grigg. And I was like, oh my God, it's Ian Grigg. I'm going to talk to Ian Grigg. He's like one of my heroes because, okay,
Yep.
so Ian Grigg is the creator of Ricardian contracts. Ricardian contract is the digital signature that literally is the precursor to what allows us to even have a blockchain. And he created a system back in the day that he kind of left behind, which was called secure and open transactions. And I think that was SXO. My buddies picked that up and they called it open transactions. And that was Justice Ranvier, a fellow traveler. And so we knew the work of Ian Grigg, and like we knew it intimately because Daniel Krawitz worked with them as well. So we knew the work of Ian Grigg. Like and to us, he was always like, wow, this guy's a hero. So I'm talking to Ian Grigg on the phone and he tells me, we were talking about different things, but he told me something. At the time, Craig Wright wasn't even in my radar. He was just someone that, whatever, was just another Bitcoiner. And he just brought up Craig Wright and he was very concerned about Craig Wright's opinion of him. I'm like, what's going on here? This guy, like Ian Grigg, is concerned about Craig Wright's opinion of him. By then we had already had a lot of the the whole situation with Gavin and Craig Wright coming out. And to me, Craig Wright, I was just like, I was disregarding the whole situation. I didn't really even pay attention to it. Then I look into what Ian Grigg wrote on his financial cryptography blog, and that blew my mind. And I saw the dates, the date that, and maybe you can tell the story a little better. The date that Gavin, whose keys were revoked from the Bitcoin repo, was the same date that he came out and said that Craig Wright was Satoshi. He never recanted that. It's still on his blog to this day. Look it up. Gavin Andreessen was the guy that Satoshi left in charge of Bitcoin. Okay. Mm-hmm. So he's a very important guy. John Matonis, the head of he was part of the Forbes magazine. Before that, he was the CTO of Hushmail, which I knew very well because guess what? Us and me and my team, the team that I worked with open transactions, we were very close to, and this guy's very private. I'm not going to, with the founder of Hushmail, which worked very close to John Matonis. So I knew John Matonis was not a dumbass when it came to cryptography, and no one's going to pull the wool over John Matonis's eyes because this guy was a CTO of Hushmail. So Hushmail was the company that was Hushmail wanted to be the privacy version of Gmail, literally. So I'm not going to name this person, but this person was offered to be the 7th employee at Google, and he refused it so he can create a private alternative to Google. Literally, that's the story, guys. So I know this background. I'm being told by Ian Grigg, that he's very like pretty much Craig Wright's opinion really matters. And I'm like, wait a minute, who is this guy? I research it, blows me away. I take a step away from it. And now this, there's this whole thing that just blew up, and I'm just kind of like a net spectator on the sidelines. And Kurt, won't you shine some light and give us that perspective of the story? Because you're a historian, you understand exactly what happened. I don't know. I'm just looking at documents.
Sure. Please. This could be a 10-hour show, frankly, on just this topic, but I should give everybody full clarity. I'm actually under NDA with Craig because I've heard portions of this story that are not yet public. I'm really excited for some of this information to come out in November via the court case. But going to Ian Grigg, I think Ian is a really great example of somebody with his own reputation. I mean, he's been in the cryptocurrency space for 20 years, which when he got into, the cryptocurrency space, there was no cryptocurrency space. Like you said, like he created some of the predicate technology that even allowed some of this stuff to be possible. And he's an incredibly nice guy. First of all, I've had a couple of private conversations with him. I was lucky enough to have a nice breakfast with him in Zurich, Switzerland earlier this year. And then when he was about to go on stage at the CoinGeek conference, I was going to be on stage with him. I've actually shared a stage with him to do an interview, much like you did yourself a little bit. But but I got to be in person with him. And when we were in the hallway before going out there, I just asked him, I was like, hey, Ian, I'd love for you to come on my live stream. I'd love to ask you some questions about like, the whole Prometheus thing and the Craig Wright or the Satoshi team and some of the other stuff. Like, would you be willing to share, whatever you can share publicly, would you be willing to share on the live stream? And he said, well, I can't share everything on a live stream because there's some private stuff that for the sake of a number of people's safety, I need to keep close to the vest, but I'd be happy to tell you as much of the story as I can. And so he came on my show, but what the conversation we had in Zurich in a back hallway, like, between the green room and the stage. It was cloak and dagger. It was people being murdered for Bitcoin. It was bonkers. And Satoshi was driven.
I want to say one thing. I have a friend who was literally sent to the hospital for Bitcoin. Like he was sent for the hospital for Bitcoin. It was so bad. He's a good friend of mine. I'm not going to say his name. He actually he quit crypto altogether. He's working on something else because he suffered so much that people have that's why, guys, like when we talk about these things, like we mean like this has been a big deal. And the Crypto Vigilante was created so that we can have these conversations, these hard conversations that no one else is having. Okay, so keep going, Kurt. My bad.
So Ian wrote, people died for Bitcoin, or people died over Bitcoin. Like I actually tweeted it earlier this week, and it's important, and people should go read his articles about Satoshi. But in reality, it's the Bitcoin civil war has been happening since day one, since the day the white paper came out. People started telling Satoshi, oh, no, here's why this won't work. Here's why it can't work. Here's all the ways that we need to re-engineer this idea. And it was, at the time, we're talking about the people in the cryptography mailing list, which is a bunch of, 3-letter government agency spooks, or it's people that work in, high-level bank security, like people that design security software and stuff like that. And then it's cypherpunk guys. But a lot of cypherpunk guys are dudes that just have an alias, but actually work for like the NSA during the day, because that's the best way for a dude that's got really high-level math in their head to have a living. Like, what are you going to do if you're a PhD in cryptography? Like, you can either be a black hat hacker and that's how you do your life, or you can work for a major financial institution, or you can work for the security apparatus, like the government in some way. And so, but you get these people that become libertarians because it's like, well, I was doing this and that for the NSA, and then here's where they made me, violate everybody's rights. And so now I'm going to leak this information, or now I'm going to create some security protocol. The guys that created PGP and some of these things, like these are just the product of, hey man, I was a patriot, I worked for the government for a while, and now I'm an anarchist, right? And so there's a lot of that in the cryptography, the Metz-Dowd cryptography mailing list. This is 2008. This is where Satoshi put the white paper, the 13th anniversary of which is October 31st this year. And but you don't know who's who, right? Like Satoshi Nakamoto was an alias. We don't really know who it is today. I think it is Craig Wright. And I believe it was Craig Wright primarily communicating under the Satoshi Nakamoto moniker. I believe it was him that wrote the white paper. But ultimately, the other people around, too, it's like you don't know if every single person responding back to him was NSA and CIA and Air Force intelligence and whoever else, So immediately it's oh, no, here's why this can't work. Here's why this isn't going to work. And then Satoshi spent about 2 years just bickering with people about the protocol. People saying, why does it got to be on SourceForge? Why won't you accept public pull requests? Why won't you why isn't it on GitHub? Why can't this be a public development project? And he had to keep telling people, like, the protocol is set in stone at version 0.1 because it's a hard money. It is a protocol to issue hard money. If you change the protocol, it's not hard money. And I think he just got really sick of things. And then he basically got booted. And it got taken over by the Sybil attack of forums, by, well, the forum moderator says, and well, now the forum moderator is going to hire a couple of admins, and the admins don't like that this thread has gone this direction, and now you're getting muted and all this. And it's just like, you get this, no proof of work conversations among a bunch of anon people on forums that are attacking the narrative. They're controlling things. And then ultimately Satoshi was gone by very early 2011, but he was practically gone much earlier, like mid 2010. And he was basically in hiding. He popped out one more time to talk or to say that Dorian Nakamoto was not Satoshi Nakamoto. And then in 2014, Satoshi's email got hacked. The GMX, the official Satoshi email, it was actually the service got hacked. And apparently Satoshi had all of his passwords saved in this email, because getting into that email allowed the hacker to log into Satoshi's P2P Foundation account and a couple other things. I believe his SourceForge and his Bitcoin talk and a bunch of other things. Like, he logged in as Satoshi and started threatening people and saying, hey, send me 25,000 Bitcoins or I'm gonna dox Satoshi. And within about 6 months of there, that's when Craig Wright got fully doxed and everything else. So I've never heard anybody else draw this conclusion, but the hacker made demands. His demands were not fulfilled. And then Craig Wright was doxed as Satoshi 6 months later. And that was the beginning of this whole fiasco with Craig Wright. And so we don't know who the hacker was. We never caught him. We don't know who the leaker was. There's this assumption, that, like, even Craig has said, well, Ira was behind the Ira Kleiman, who is the executor of the guy he's suing, this giant lawsuit that starts in November. But anyways, if you don't know the context on that, there's a lot of context there. But
okay, Kurt, before we get into the actual case, let me clarify a couple things. Okay, so you've said that Bitcoin originally was not on GitHub, that it was on SourceForge. Could you explain to people who are listening what SourceForge is? I remember SourceForge using RetroShare. I used to use RetroShare as my buddies back in the day. It was based on SourceForge. So RetroShare was a way to communicate with one another. It was not P2P. It still exists. It's friend to friend, which is really cool.
Yep.
SourceForge, as I understand it, is proprietary, correct?
So SourceForge is basically just an old competitor to GitHub, but at the time it was much more common. It was much more common for not closed source, for open source projects that were closed development. So if you were a big company, for example, like let's say you were like a software development company, but all of your stuff was going to be patented, you wouldn't necessarily.
I do remember this now, because RetroShare, I remember us having this conversation about RetroShare, because I remember us saying, I wish RetroShare was open source so that we can add things to it.
Yeah. And if it's SourceForge, typically if you're going to, at the time anyways, this is actually very different now. So GitHub and SourceForge both have like lots of open source stuff, but GitHub is way, way bigger than SourceForge. At the time in 2008, SourceForge was actually about a 1-to-1 competitor with GitHub. GitHub was quite a bit less popular at the time, but SourceForge was the like, hey, we're releasing a software candidate. The Git control, this allows developers to make proposals, but they're internal developers. Like, nobody's allowed to develop unless they're invited into the developer circle. Typically, they're employees of a software department of a big company, and it is not open source. We do not want our competitors copying our software, but we are using a decentralized Git control repo so that somebody can work in India or England or Silicon Valley, and they all get to make proposals of changes together. So you're working in a open development environment, but open development does not necessarily mean open source. Satoshi, when he issued the protocol, he then issued the software in such a way where it was open source. You could read it, but it was not open development. He was not accepting public pull requests. He didn't want anybody's information. In fact, he was called a tyrant for handing out development tasks to guys like Gavin, Marty Malmy, Laszlo, who's one of the guys that helped him build some different mining software, stuff like that. But ultimately, it was Satoshi's project, and he said, "Hey, Gavin, I would like you to build X and bring it in. Like, let's clean this up." And that was SourceForge. But the criticism, all the people from GitHub, they're like, "Hey, I know 3 or 4 developers from whatever, Google or other companies that are really, really good developers. If we just let them go through the code, maybe they can propose their own solutions to things, and you can accept the stuff. And Satoshi just always said no. He said, no, I'm not interested in that. Software developers are going to want to tinker with the protocol. He didn't want to change the protocol. I think there's a very important distinction that people need to understand about protocol, software, and rules, because a lot of people use them very interchangeably when talking about Bitcoin. You can change Bitcoin software without changing Bitcoin's protocol, but the protocol is what defines the rules that can be kept, bent, or broken. Okay, this is like the constitution of Bitcoin is the protocol of Bitcoin. So like a good example is that all governance is by proof of work, that valid blocks are validated by building valid blocks on top of valid blocks. This is a protocol thing. An implementation thing would be like, yeah, you can write a light client in Golang or Rust. Like that doesn't matter, right? The software still is in harmony with the protocol. And then there's things like a consensus rule people think are protocol rules, and they're not necessarily. Consensus rules, Bitcoin rules, protocol rules. There's a hierarchy of the way that rules and rule enforcement should be understood in Bitcoin, because Satoshi was very clear about that. Satoshi even hard forked Bitcoin himself in 2010 when there was a bug. Like there was a massive bug in the code that created an inflation problem, and he said, well, that is a violation of the protocol, so we are going to change a consensus rule in order to fix that violation of the protocol. And you know that's a really good example for us to understand how things like that are, you know, how Satoshi intended for them to work in the wild. But people have changed their minds about this because it's, you know, it's the people's money. It's got to be open source and open development, and all of those are not Bitcoin values. Those are open source software values that have been grafted onto Bitcoin's culture, but that was not really Bitcoin's culture as intended.
But see, Kurt. Okay. This is where I tend to I have never given my personal opinion on this, but this is where I think I need to start giving my personal opinion. Bitcoin did not come from a vacuum. Bitcoin, and even if you read what Craig Wright wrote, even if you follow the narrative that he was part of Team Satoshi or was the main architect behind Bitcoin, he even says that he was surrounded by cypherpunks, and he says that he would go to the conferences, he would go hang out with them, but he learned a lot from them, and they helped each other out a lot, but he never agreed with them on everything. Okay, so if you were to ask me because if I'm going by the one guy here that I know, based on his proof of work and that I respect a lot, is Ian Grigg, right? And I don't see him having a reason to lie. If I were to go by what he has written on, it was May 2nd, 2016 and May 4th, 2017. If you guys want to look at his financial cryptography entries from those dates, he says that Satoshi was a team. And he says that Craig Wright was the driver of that team. I think that team was made up of people that are no longer part of BSV. This is my opinion. I think that within that team, I could be wrong. There's no way for me to know this, but I think that within that team, there were people that went on to be the spearheaders of privacy coins. This is my opinion. I think that there was this team. I think that even within this team, there was conflict, and I think that there were different opinions as to what Bitcoin was for and about, and that's why it manifested itself in the way that it has. Where on one extreme, we have BSV that says don't change anything. Bitcoin's supposed to be a truth machine, a complete autonomous proof of work system that where the miners are never interfered with in their process of validating blocks and extending the ledger. And then there was another extreme of people that I think were of the opinion that no, that Bitcoin's supposed to be digital gold, and that we're supposed to tackle the problem of money first and foremost, the problem of money being that which is most important in everything, because as we know, central banks control governments and the central banking cartel is something that that it is part of that cypherpunk libertarian ethos, which is ultimately manifested in what Monero is. I can't say that is manifested in BTC or in Bitcoin Cash because they are not fungible by default at the protocol level, but it is manifested in Monero 100%. And you see a lot of the same contributors of BTC and Bitcoin, even Bitcoin Cash, also contributing to the Monero project, right? You find everyone at Monero conferences. It is interesting. So that's where, sure. If I were to agree with Ian Grigg and say, okay, well, Craig Wright was part of this team. Okay, I can accept that. Mm-hmm. And then I can accept the fact that, you know, there's still, I don't know if that was correct, if that was right or wrong. I wasn't there. I'm just trusting this guy that I think is someone that should be trustworthy. You know, I've had this conversation with my team and they pose a real good question to me. How do you know Ian Grigg is not a Fed? How do you know he's not compromised himself? You know, how do you know where are we in all of this, right? I mean, the truth is, just as I advocate for people to have an open mind towards the whole situation with Craig Wright and the whole situation regarding BSV and what BSV technology is, I also have to step back and have an open mind towards everything that BSV is, because someone from BSV, I'm not going to dox them, but they posed a question not too long ago. And the question was, what if what BTC and Bitcoin Cash advocated for was to prevent what if the real intention to move away from Bitcoin's original design was to make sure that Bitcoin was not used as a weapon against humanity, because we're moving towards an Orwellian nightmare. What if there is good motivation behind BTC and Bitcoin Cash and Monero and moving to ever more privacy because they're scared that Bitcoin will be used against people? So
I mean, it's an interesting notion, but I think that it ignores what that tyranny actually looks like in practice. So people will say that BSV is a panopticon. I've heard people say this a bunch of times. Panopticon is if you're in a prison that is a big circle, there's a tower in the middle of the prison that you know has a couple of guards and a couple of snipers, and if anybody makes it out of their cell, they're very easy to shoot. But that design is actually a hub and spoke network, right? So it's everybody around the outside, and there's one hub in the center that allows control from that center. And BSV is not that. And that's the really interesting thing, is that BSV is a small world network. And so the incentives are for all value creating nodes to be connected very closely to one another. And this is what we call a mandala graph. Like in stark contrast, this panopticon that people say that BSV is, it's actually the opposite. BTC is actually a panopticon, because the privacy that the privacy that is innate in Bitcoin is impossible in BTC, for one. So section 10 of the white paper is the privacy section, where it explains how to actually remain anonymous in Bitcoin. This is a word that Satoshi used in the Bitcoin white paper is anonymous, and that you can remain anonymous as long as you don't dox your public key. Like, you can generate a public key right now and nobody knows that that's Rafael's. They can see that something went to it, but they don't know that it belongs to you or that it came from me or whatever else. And this broke because, first of all, small blocks break it, because it means that you must use custodians, and each of those custodians become a hub in a hub and spoke network. But then also, the second part of the privacy section talks about the need to use a different key pair for every single transaction. But if you're transacting in very small transactions and generating lots of key pairs, this is impractical to use in BTC because the fees are too high. So you can't have a penny distributed across 1 million addresses because you can't spend any of those pennies. They're all cost. They would all be mined as fees. So you can't use, even if you had $100,000 spread across a million addresses with a penny each in them, you don't own any of that money. All of that money is just sitting and waiting to go into a miner's wallet for trying to consolidate those UTXOs. And so the privacy model of Bitcoin is completely broken by BTC and really BCH at scale. BCH would have the exact same problems as BTC if it scaled up. But in BSV, you can, first of all, you can use that segment of the network just fine, because a 10,000th of a penny is something that it could be a viable fee on BSV. And so you can have millions of key pairs spread across all kinds of things. And maybe some of them got doxed because you bought some of your BSV from some exchange at some point, and there can be some linking back to you. But ultimately, as that graph spreads and gets larger and larger, it's impossible. Like, I mean, somebody would need to take your phone again, and really, they would need to audit all of your public key hashes. They'd have to audit the whole tree of public key hashes in order to say, this is your money and we know that you're using it. And so the privacy model of Bitcoin, while quite different from the privacy model of something like Monero or something like, a ZK Snarks layer of other things, which is a totally different thing. Pirate chain. These are very, very different privacy models, but in reality, nobody ever tried Bitcoin's privacy model because BTC broke it, and then BCH never tried to fix it, but it's been fixed in BSV to allow for someone like me or you to have, I mean, I could have 1 billion Bitcoin addresses. That's fine. That works just fine. And when I might be a billionaire, but if I try to send you, $12 and buy a few coffees and a donut at a place, it only consolidates the UTXOs that are necessary for that $12. You would need a forensic auditor and tons and tons of time to say that I have any more than the $12 that I used to make that purchase. And so at scale, Bitcoin BSV is private. It is practically private in all the ways that really matter, unless, like if you want absolute anonymity, I would argue that it doesn't actually exist anywhere, because any piece of cryptography can be broken. All locks fail eventually, but
theoretically, yes.
Theoretically, yes.
Yes, and even Fluffy Pony would say, don't use Monero for anything illegal. You don't know what the future might hold, and there might be some innovation that will break, back in time what was held in the Monero blockchain. But the thing is that it's almost like, we're talking about like a dirty little secret in BSV. And it's almost like, I've always seen Craig Wright as someone that, I don't know, man. It just seems like this guy's playing a role. Like to me, it's always seemed like he's pretending to be something that I had a conversation with him on Twitter that got me blocked by him, where I asked him, is there anything more efficient than proof of work? And he said, no, there's nothing more efficient than proof of work. Then I asked him, is there anything that government does that is more efficient than proof of work? And he said, no, there's nothing that government does that's more efficient than proof of work. My next question then was, why do we need government? If everything's more efficient with proof of work, then why can't we have a world governed by miners? And he blocked me right there. He didn't answer. It's like, dude, logically, he would obviously have to agree with me, but it's almost as if Craig Wright is playing this game with the state, which, hey, guess what? If I was part of Team Satoshi and I was doxxed, if let's say everything that Kurt says is truly what happened, if I was doxxed and I was a creator of Bitcoin, and I want Bitcoin's the design of Bitcoin, what I wanted it to be to survive, more than likely I'm gonna play ball with the state, and more than likely I'm gonna get in with the law, and I will be putting patents together to protect Bitcoins, because I see everything else. I see Bitcoin for how valuable it is. I'd probably be doing the same thing Craig Wright is doing. And if there's this little anarchist guy on the internet asking me logical questions that I might block him too. It's like, I don't see his way of reacting towards me as illogical. I see him playing a role.
I think he's also, I mean, Craig doesn't like people that want to get a gotcha on him, because everybody wants to gotcha on Craig. So if he felt like there was a gotcha coming, or felt like that was the point, he's done. So that's, not to defend him necessarily on all of that either, but nobody's got more enemies than
to respond to me however he wants. It's
sure
his opinion,
yeah
and I respect it. And that's what I said. Like when I say about him as a person, I don't know. I just
right.
If look, this is what Ian Grigg said. Does Ian Grigg have a reason to lie? I don't know. Justice Ranvier, who worked with me with open transactions, he said something very important one day, and he said, if you want to be, he said, the best of people are those who understand poker the best. In order to be a good person, not a goodish person, I mean a real good person that is shrewd and that knows how to deal with all types of people and knows how to tell good from evil, you have to be a very good poker player. And amongst those poker players, if you're going to look for that awesome person, you're going to encounter a lot of scammers, because scammers are great poker players. They're amazing poker players. But if you can get through the scammers, amongst the poker players, you'll find the best of people. What does that mean? I don't know. You understood what that meant? You understood what that meant, but I don't have time to explain.
I should clarify a little bit. I actually, this is one of the things I talked to Ian about, the team aspect of things. And a lot why Ian got involved, and this is Ian's story. I don't know if it's true, but this is what Ian said, is that he felt that Satoshi was in danger. After doing his own study on like what is Bitcoin and who is Satoshi, he realized, ooh, this is too disruptive. He's got enemies, and he might get killed or doxxed or destroyed, or might have his ideas stolen or whatever. And so Ian took it upon himself to basically figure out if he could protect Satoshi. And what he says he did is he came up with this notion of Satoshi being a team in order to throw people off the scent of Satoshi if Satoshi was an individual. So he wasn't sure if Satoshi was a team or a person or whatever, but he thought that it might be a good idea to act like he knew it was a team and start publicly saying the Satoshi team in order to get anybody else who was trying to figure out who is Satoshi to say, oh, shoot, it's more than one. So like if they were to discover one person who they believed was Satoshi, that basically they couldn't kill him because they would need him to get information to find the other members of the team. So this was his thought process to treating Satoshi like a team.
Right.
And then
let me clarify something for the audience here. Guys, you have to understand that what Kurt and I are advocating for is an understanding of Bitcoin that goes way beyond anything that BTC and Bitcoin Cash claim Bitcoin to be. I would even dare to say it is more disruptive and more radical, Bitcoin as being more radical than any privacy coin. And the reason why is because our understanding of Bitcoin's original design is that Bitcoin was created to disrupt big tech, to literally outcompete Google and Amazon. So yes, our understanding of Bitcoin, the Bitcoin I fell in love with, is the Bitcoin where the most important app of Bitcoin is innovation, the disruption of innovation, where you can compete with Bitcoin right now by using the Bitcoin miners as the back end of your business, where you don't have to depend on Silicon Valley for to fund a startup, because the back end has already been created for you. But with the miners, you just plug and play. That is a level of disruption that is, in my opinion, more disruptive. And my team disagrees with me on this. I think that is more disruptive than a privacy coin. And let me tell you why. It's more disruptive than a privacy coin because with the privacy coin, with this technocratic Leviathan that we have growing around us, all you're able to do with the privacy coin is hide. And my question is, do you want to hide forever? I don't want to hide forever. I see Bitcoin as a meritocracy of value that allows us to leverage off one another's entrepreneurship, where we can come together and outcompete big tech. And this is why I talk about it. This is why Kurt fights for it. And this is why we're having this conversation, because this is a narrative that there is a complete silence in all of crypto about this. And when I saw happen with the Bitcoin civil war, which in my opinion started, Kurt said it from day one. I wasn't there on day one, but when I started really seeing it was when Ethereum came out and we had this brain drain into a myriad of different altcoins. When I knew all the time that we could all build on Bitcoin. Everyone could have built on the Bitcoin blockchain. All of these altcoins, all of these projects could have been built on the Bitcoin original blockchain at scale, but they didn't allow us to scale. That's why we had the civil war. And that's why we're able to follow through on this original experiment of Bitcoin with BSV and really harnessing the power of it so that we can see if our assessment was right to begin with regarding Bitcoin. And guess what, guys? It's working. It's working. In Bitcoin's original design, it is the only blockchain where the more you use the blockchain, the cheaper transaction fees are. To me, like I said at the CoinGeek conference, Bitcoin in its original design is a symphony of aligned incentives. Like what was created was much more than technology, guys. It was an awesome system where all incentives are aligned and driven in one direction to profit everyone at the same time. That is not seen anywhere else in crypto, guys. And when he's talking about, and I've seen people get hurt around me because of Bitcoin, and Ian Grigg said that people have died for Bitcoin. Yeah, guys, we're talking about that. This idea that what we're talking about right now, Bitcoin's original design, it's in itself the most radical, revolutionary, most badass thing in all of crypto, because it doesn't hide from the powers that shouldn't be. It attacks them directly by competing with them with something better in the market. Nothing else in crypto does what BSV does, guys. This is why it's so important to talk about this. So I get off my soapbox. Kurt, keep talking. My bad.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. It's like ultimately, like I'm very much a libertarian. Satoshi was clearly a libertarian. I've had conversations with Craig, and I asked him point blank about 6 months ago on a Zoom call, like, Craig, what would you call your political opinions? And he said, well, and he's sitting back in his gangster chair like he does in his office with his samurai swords behind him and stuff. And he says, Kurt, I'm like he's like sort of he's like, my worldview is very classical liberal. And he said, but like libertarian in the most basic sense. Like, he said, I think it's funny. People like to think that I'm a statist or that I'm some kind of, pro government shill because I talk about the dangers essentially of law, and that, if you're a random person and you don't generate an LLC and then you issue a money, like you've broken a law by issuing money. Like, this is why Satoshi Nakamoto issued money under a pseudonym. And then this is what Craig said. He's like, there's a reason like that the statute of limitations is 10 years long, and why I waited to really claim my position as Satoshi Nakamoto. Like, he denied that he was Satoshi for a very long time. And ultimately, it wasn't until 2018 that he started to say, okay, yes, I am Satoshi. But because it was the 10-year moratorium on punishment for issuing a new money that allowed him to say, hey, statute of limitations, like maybe you could have thrown me in gulags 5 years ago, but now we're past that. Bitcoin is what it is. Yes, I'm the creator. I'm the man behind the pseudonym. So it's Satoshi. Craig is very much a libertarian, but people like to think of him as threatening people all the time. Like when he talks about like, well, hey, you're going to end up in a pound me in the ass prison somewhere for what you've done. And the fact of the matter is he's not threatening people. He's warning them. He's saying, hey, bro, when you cause like a taxable event for hundreds or thousands or millions of other people by changing the protocol and airdropping new coins to them, you're acting as a fiduciary globally. And all of these world jurisdictions have very strict laws about acting as a fiduciary over somebody's money without their permission and without you being properly licensed. And then if you're doing it as hey, I'm just an independent developer issuing a thing on GitHub, then you are an unlimited liability entity, meaning that you have no corporate protections, and whatever harm you cause somebody, you are 100% personally liable for. And so that's a huge warning. Like me as a libertarian, somebody who says government should like get really, really small until it's gone. Like this is my political opinion. But I'm going to tell people, you know, however, you need to be responsible. I wouldn't advise you to, like just break the law successively and bigger and bolder. Like you're going to end up in prison and that's going to suck for you. And now you're no longer an activist or all these things, you know, and like, it's sexy being a martyr for a cause, but ultimately, like guys like me and you, for example, it's better that we're not in prison, right, Raph? So
well, here, let me ask you about like guys like you and me real quick. It's a kind of a different topic, but it blends in with all of this. There are other big blockers around, you know, and I told you, like I had a buddy who was very influential. He went by a pseudonym. He actually left crypto because, you know, he kept getting bullied and he went to the hospital, whatever. Why is it that you and I are talking about this? Where the heck is Mike Hearn? Like Craig Wright, when he talks about Bitcoin, Craig Wright is literally saying the same thing, like very similar things to what Mike Hearn was saying. Where's Gavin?
Very similar.
Why
and in a very similar tone too.
But why aren't these guys talking? Why? What the heck happened, dude? Like, let's really get to the bottom of this, because these guys were very influential in Bitcoin history. And all of a sudden it's like, yo, something happened. I don't know what happened, but what happened? Kurt, what happened?
Mike is a really unique character in that he was one of the more qualified people to ever work on Bitcoin from a development standpoint. He was a world-class software developer, and he was close friends with Satoshi starting from like the first month that Bitcoin existed. Mike, you know, aside from like looking at all the cypherpunk anon people that were basically harassing Satoshi, Mike Hearn showed up and said, "Hi, I'm Mike Hearn from the UK, and these are my work credentials and all these different things. Satoshi, can I ask you some relevant questions about Bitcoin? Can we email? I would like to ask you so I can understand and help you implement things." And so Satoshi and Mike had a very good relationship very early. Their emails are all public now. So you can see the relationship that Satoshi and Mike had, where he asks all kinds of questions about like, well, you know, can it scale? And this is where like the quote about Bitcoin scaling bigger than Visa today with existing hardware is something Satoshi said in 2008 to Mike Hearn, and or maybe 2009. But nonetheless, so Mike was always a big blocker from day one, from before there were big blockers and small blockers. Mike was like, well, hey, I'll just create a client that allows people to mine 2 megabyte blocks or 5 megabyte blocks or whatever. Like the Bitcoin XT client was, hey, let's let miners be able to choose a miner policy setting on their node and say, well, I'm willing to accept a bigger block than a 1 megabyte block. And that's what XT was. Bitcoin XT was choice on Bitcoin. And for creating that choice, Mike Hearn was viciously criticized. All of a sudden it was, he's a corporate, he worked at Google, he's evil, this is Google trying to take over Bitcoin, we need to get rid of Mike, we need to revoke Mike's keys. And ultimately, Mike kept fighting. Mike started writing more and more articles. He explained to people why soft forks are a form of tyranny, for example, which is not something anybody will tell you today, except me, frankly. But I've written about it a little bit. But it's true. A soft fork is a way to undermine consensus. And Mike explained this with very clear English to understand, like, oh, soft forks don't mean a small change. Soft forks mean any change, but bundled up in such a way that it's like malware. And so Mike was undermining guys like Greg Maxwell and Peter Todd and some of the more vile small blocker types. And then ultimately, Mike remained successful and really only left after the DDoS attacks. So he was running a bunch of Bitcoin XT infrastructure, which was completely in consensus with Bitcoin Core. None of it was consensus breaking because nobody was sending any block attempts that were larger than the consensus of the network. So Bitcoin XT nodes were running on the network just fine. And he started to be DDoSed. And not just him, not his IP address, it was his ISP, meaning everyone in the region that he lived was kicked off the internet because he was being DDoS attacked. So this went on for days. This is actually, when you DDoS an ISP, it's actually in most jurisdictions a form of terrorism. because a DDoS attack usually is a precursor to larger attacks. And so most first world governments have established that a DDoS attack against a large ISP or a large infrastructural entity is itself considered a terrorist attack. So Mike Hearn was terrorized off the network, and Mike realized at that point in 2015, he was looking at all the stuff that was going on, all the craziness, all the anti-Satoshi propaganda, the small blocker takeover of Bitcoin. And he wrote a letter in 2015 and said, look, Bitcoin, it's called oh my God, what is it called? It's the something of the Bitcoin experiment. Basically it's done. Bitcoin's dead. And people laugh at him today because they're like, well, he sold all his coins and he's going to have fun staying poor and blah, blah, blah. But what he was saying was dead was the real culture of proof of work and the culture of disrupting global finance and global fintech. And the way that he wrote it, he explained, he in fact very explicitly said, the largest portion of it for me is the toxicity of Greg Maxwell. Like, the dude is a toxic prick and has made it impossible to have a dissenting opinion about Bitcoin. If you disagree with Greg, Greg will spend all of his resources silencing you, to the point that that part of the reason that he quit was so that his neighbors and even the people that he didn't know that lived around him would no longer have to be terrorized by the small blockers destroying their internet connection, destroying infrastructure, and all these things. And ultimately, he was pushed out as violently as possible, just shy of actually invading his home and silencing him like Wetworks style. So he's a yeah.
Really quick. So you were one of the only people in the world aside from Jeff Berwick, my business partner, himself. When all of these things were happening in real time, Jeff was the only one in the world that came up and said, these are the small blockers. And he gave all of where their funding has come from. This is what's happening in Bitcoin. This is what's going on. Okay. And Jeff became a big blocker because of that. And he was like, Jeff pretty much he aligned himself with Bitcoin Cash at the same time you and I were. And then Jeff kind of, when Bitcoin Cash had its own civil war, Jeff kind of took a step back and was like, you know what? He just said, actually, this is what I'm really after is something that fixes the main issue of money. Monero's the way to go, right? So that was Jeff's journey, but he called things out in real time, which I've only known someone else to call that out, which was you. You called out the origin of the small blockers. Can you share to us what pretty much Jeff said in real time for the audience, please?
So plain and simple, guys like Adam Back, who's now the CEO of Blockstream, large recipient of Tether venture money. Just recently, they got another $210 million from Tether's parent company, iFinex. But guys like Adam Back, guys like Peter, I believe it's pronounced Wheelie, who's one of the major contributors to Bitcoin Core today. These guys were big blockers. They had roadmaps of big blocks. Hey, we're going to go to 8 megabytes, and then we're going to double it every 2 years for the next 10, and then we'll reassess, that kind of thing. So they had these roadmaps that fully acknowledge that Satoshi Nakamoto was right. He intended for Bitcoin big block stuff to be reality. Greg Maxwell and Peter Todd and guys like them, they were never big blockers. They never said anything positive in that regard at all. In fact, Peter Todd goes as far back as 2013, producing a video about like how small blocks are necessary. It's the only way forward for Bitcoin. But the people that were big blockers, or the people that were kind of on the fence, all of a sudden things changed very rapidly in 2014. Blockstream received a seed round of about $40 million. I believe it was a Series A, maybe it was an angel level, but whatever. It was about $40 million bucks to establish Blockstream as a professional development corporation. The venture capital groups that were involved there are all shell companies that are related to MasterCard Ventures. MasterCard Ventures helped spin up Digital Currency Group as an incubator. Digital Currency Group includes guys like Larry Summers, who was a Clinton White House policy advisor and former executive. I believe he may have even been the president or something of the World Bank. He's worked at the highest levels of global fiat finance. They've also got money from Silverlight Capital, Bain Capital being Mitt Romney's venture firm, things like that. So they created Digital Currency Group. MasterCard created Digital Currency Group as an incubator, as a company. They are not a fund. They are not a hedge fund. They're an incubator. They're a company that is designed to steer the behavior of other companies. This is what incubators do. And so Blockstream and the people there, the guys who were, 6 months earlier were saying, oh yeah, no, our roadmap includes 8 megabyte blocks sometime in the next 18 months, all of a sudden are absolutely not. 1 megabyte block size should be absolutely permanent. We're developing a bunch of protocol changes. We're going to create the Lightning Network. Here's this absurdly long Lightning Network white paper. And we're going to establish Lightning Labs. And then Lightning Labs is owned by the same venture capitalists. So now we've got MasterCard controlling Blockstream and Lightning Labs. And then they buy a controlling stake in Coinbase and Kraken. And then they establish the Grayscale Investment Fund, which is the largest publicly traded BTC investment fund. And then they've got Genesis Trading, and then they bought BitGo, and they bought Fireblocks, and they bought Abra Wallet, and they bought Zappo and BitPay. Probably 50 or 60 other major brands in the Bitcoin space too. They bought all of them as an incubator. Like, come to us, give us some equity, and we're going to teach you how to run a real company. And so all these people who started out as maybe cypherpunks, or maybe just people interested in fintech, or maybe just people who wanted to get rich, and you start to say, hey, here's a few million bucks, take an executive level salary, you work for us now, you start developing stuff that's good for the rest of the portfolio. We're all going to work together. We're going to do what's best for Bitcoin, for decentralization or whatever. But then all of a sudden, all these entities have this monolithic narrative that ultimately MasterCard is paying for. And then you got to think about, okay, who is MasterCard really? They are one of the largest players in the payment space. And so if you look at Bitcoin as a potential disruptor in the payments space, who do they want to make sure that they keep in a very tight little box, right? So all of a sudden, it's Bitcoin isn't for payments. You would only transact Bitcoin if it didn't really have value. If you transact it at all, if you use it for payments, you're actually losing money every single time, because if you were to just hodl, you're going to get rich. So don't ever use it as a medium of exchange. It doesn't make any sense. It's expensive and it's going to get more expensive to use, but you're going to keep making more and more money the more you don't transact with it. And so they undermined the entire Bitcoin roadmap and the people that were doing it. So if we want to break down some of the other things here, look at what's the biggest Bitcoin podcast. This is the What Bitcoin Did podcast, right? So Peter McCormack. Well, who pays Peter McCormack? The first person he thanks every single time is Kraken. And Kraken is a portfolio company of Digital Currency Group, which is owned by MasterCard. And then who's the most read blockchain news source? It is CoinDesk. CoinDesk is owned by Digital Currency Group, which is owned by MasterCard Ventures. So if you're going to listen to something about Bitcoin, if you're going to read something about Bitcoin, or if you're going to go on any of these influencer, maybe pick the top 100 accounts that talk about blockchain or BTC generally, who pays them? Who sponsors them to go to speaking events? Who's sponsoring the speaking events that they go to? Who's setting these things up? Like, it always goes back up to the same cabal. And it's people that show up and say, don't spend. Anyone that says that you should spend your Bitcoin is scamming you. Bitcoin's a store of value. If you just hold your Bitcoin, don't think about the money you could make by building a business on Bitcoin, because that'd be an opportunity cost had you not hodled. If you do anything but hodl, you're losing money. And so they have completely bought and sold and jammed that narrative up everyone's collective ass, to the point where anyone that has anything to say about, like, hey, Bitcoin was designed to be a global like Satoshi Nakamoto said it was faster than Visa with existing hardware 12 fucking years ago, Like, and then, well, that's just something Craig Wright would say. And it's no, this is a quote from Satoshi Nakamoto, the person who designed the thing that you claim that you like, and you're just going to throw that out the window and say, he didn't get it. Greg Maxwell gets it. We can trust Greg Maxwell because Peter McCormick said so. And like, they've created this narrative, but it all goes up to old world money. It goes to the Silicon Valley firms, and it goes to the old big banks, period. That is who has controlled the entirety of the last 7 or 8 years in Bitcoin history at this point.
What about, what's the other developer, Vladimir, who's funded by MIT?
Van der Laan.
Yeah.
So they claim to be this independent incubator group at the MIT Digital Currency Initiative. The MIT Digital Currency Initiative was founded by the guy running the department at the, I believe they just call it the Media Lab at MIT. Was a guy by the name of Joi Ito. He's a Japanese businessman. Ito seemed like a good guy and super interested, but like, hey, we're going to create this student incubator group and whatever. We're going to try to accelerate some Bitcoin development. Well, the guys that ended up being paid actually include Gavin Andresen for a couple of years, no longer by a long shot, but Vladimir van der Laan, who for most of Bitcoin's history was the largest contributor of code of anybody else. Nobody committed more code than Vladimir for like 2/3 of all of the time that Bitcoin's existed. I believe he's just been superseded in the last year or so because he retired a little while ago. And then the other guy is Corey Fields, who was a major maintainer of the Bitcoin Core repo. That's all well and good. Like, hey, it's a university funded, it's funded by donations. But then if you look into it, the biggest donor was a company called Digital Garage. Digital Garage is a venture capital firm that is tied up in a bunch of shell companies with the other Silicon Valley partners, makes its way all the way back up to MasterCard Ventures, blah, 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 blah. But then Digital Garage, which is a Japanese firm, they were a Tokyo-based firm. They actually got busted. This is going back probably 3 or 4 years ago now. They got busted for laundering money from Jeffrey Epstein. So Jeffrey Epstein was a Bitcoin user, like lots of other people that have international business to do. And but Jeffrey Epstein really wanted to make things more useful for the line of business he was in, which, as most people are aware of today, is human trafficking. But Jeffrey Epstein was giving large sums of money to Digital Garage, which is a Tokyo-based firm, which was laundering it with other funds and then donating it, earmarked for the MIT Digital Currency Initiative. So it was going to the Media Lab and essentially into the development pockets of the hierarchy there, and ultimately paying for contribution again to Bitcoin Core. Jeffrey is was a known Bitcoiner. And very much a hardline small blocker. And so some of this is a little bit content. People tell me, that's made up too, Kurt. But I mean, you can find New York Times articles of ultimately when the story broke, to everyone's credit, Joi Ito was forced to step down. He was removed in shame from the MIT Digital Currency Initiative, lost his job. He is still, as I understand it, or last I checked anyways, the head of Digital Garage, but he no longer is affiliated there. So the slap on the wrist was, hey, Joi, you lose your job, buddy. But he was deliberately laundering money through his venture firm right to the other developers. And again, connected to that whole cabal of Silicon Valley and MasterCard people as well. But essentially, if you look at the top 20 contributors of Bitcoin or to Bitcoin of all time, which is like 90+% of all code ever contributed to Bitcoin Core, it comes almost entirely from the same small group of people. And so the direction of the project has very much been steered by people that have an absolute conflict of interest in opposition to Bitcoin being used as a payment system or a disruptor in fintech. And like you said, I haven't heard anybody else say it. I do recall Jeff saying this years ago. But as far as I'm aware, I'm the only person that writes about it. I've kind of made myself the figurehead on this narrative because it's something that people just don't know. And every time people hear it, they're like, oh, that just sounds impossible. It's very easy to find. Digital Currency Group's portfolio is published on their website. And you can find, again, MasterCard's portfolio includes Digital Currency Group. And It's not that hard of an onion to peel, but it's there. It's a huge conflict of interest, and people should know that the consensus opinion about Bitcoin and blockchain in general that you hear from the media, the influencers, and from all the companies that are talking to you about Bitcoin, they're almost all tangled up in that cabal of essentially MasterCard, the central banks in Silicon Valley.
And I really think that that's the reason why, Bitcoin was created to begin with, is so that we don't have a supreme Byzantine general, or one group that establishes itself as the undisputed overlords of Bitcoin. Unfortunately, I mean, there has never been a dispute where Bitcoin Core has not been the victor within BTC. Yeah. And it's just, well, it's sad that things happened the way that they did, Kurt, but at the same time, I almost see it now in hindsight as almost necessary for everything to have happened.
Sure.
And the reason why is because now BSV is being built by, with a network of entrepreneurs that understand Bitcoin, and that understand that the way forward within Bitcoin is entrepreneurship on chain, using the Bitcoin miners as the back end of the business, where no one group can control the evolution of the code. The code can, the protocol itself cannot evolve. It's something that's fixed, stable. So I think it's actually a good thing. I also find it very impressive what entrepreneurs have been able to accomplish on BSV since they broke off from Bitcoin Cash and BTC, because it's almost as if in Bitcoin BTC, the BTC economy is dependent on legacy financial institutions. It is how is BTC perceived on exchanges? How is it perceived by Wall Street? How is it perceived by fintech? And that affects the price of the coin, and the price of the coin affects the health of the miners and the health of the network. In Bitcoin's original design, and my understanding of Bitcoin, is that I never wanted our Bitcoin to ever be dependent on what these people think about us. I want Bitcoin, I've always wanted Bitcoin to be nourished from within, for there to be an on-chain economy that, regardless of how the world sees us, we're a competing economy from within that takes care of takes care of our miners, where miners make more money from transaction fees than they do from the block reward. And that's finally happening on BSV. Where are we on BSV with that? I know you follow this very closely.
Yeah, I mean, we're the only chain in existence that has ever had fees measured in Satoshis, or I think fees measured in fiat as well, that are over and above the block subsidy. So the block reward exists to bootstrap the network. It's a subsidy to get you going, right? So every block you mined, it started with 50. After the first halving, it was 25, then 12 and a half, and now we're at 6 1/4. So there are 6 1/4 Bitcoins to be mined with every block. BSV has had, I don't even know, dozens, hundreds of blocks that are near 2 gigabytes, which a 2 gigabyte block has it should have over 10 coins worth of fees. So for every block that you mine, you are getting about 16 coins in total take, which is a lot more than you could earn on any other chain. Now, granted, it's not a lot measured in USD value, but we're supposed to be getting away from the fiat measuring stick, right? So it's the only network that has shown that it is possible to mine a block where there is more fees than there is subsidy. And people need to realize that subsidy is drying up intentionally. These subsidies were made in order to bootstrap and push people to figure out ways to put more stuff on chain, because putting stuff on chain is the thing that gets miners paid after the subsidy is dried up. We've all been very lucky to live in a subsidized Bitcoin world. Satoshi subsidized us with the protocol, and but it's up to us to learn how to walk before the training wheels are pulled off. And Satoshi is pulling those training wheels off 50% at a time every 4 years, and so.
And it's almost like the those that were backing the BTC initiative, that small miner mindset, kind of understood this, because now BTC forever is intrinsically tied to the interest of Wall Street, to the interest of the banking elite. If Elon Musk says something, they all fall in line. Yes, sir. You know, we're going to change the way we do things in order to be more energy efficient, for example, right?
Yeah.
There is no possibility for BTC to ever grow on chain. I know that there's some attempts, like from someone like Paul Storks with Drive Chains, which is, you know, what Blockstream promised. They promised to give the world side chains. They never did. So Paul Storks had to create side chains on his own. If he implements it, they might have a chance to maybe start experimenting with growth on chain. But I see it very difficult, because their whole emphasis now is on growing BTC off chain through a second layer, through the Lightning Network. That's where they're all focusing on. And it's pretty sad, because recently I snuck into a Lightning Network developer conference. You want to see, you know, it's really sad, actually. They were having a discussion on how to properly ask VCs for funding. I'm like, really? Like, dude, you don't need that anymore, you know, with Bitcoin's original design. But hey, they're acquiescing to that old worldview of legacy banking, big tech. That's why I think Twitter loves them. Twitter loves BTC because it fits into it doesn't disrupt them at all. It's just, no, it fits in. And it's almost like the miners in BTC just keep getting malnourished, because now they're only they're just doing 7 transactions per second. And then you have and then you have an economy that is propped up by the investment of and by the goodwill of big tech and institutional money that's coming in. So it's forever going to be, the whore of the establishment. I don't see it changing. Whereas BSV is like delisted from exchanges. Everyone hates it. Everyone talks bad about it. And yet entrepreneurs are building an on-chain economy that is independent of everything outside of it, and that is just growing. So let's talk about this case that's about to, start on November 1st that no one is talking about, and this is the main reason why I brought you here. What's happening? What's going on? Why is this case happening? What's going on?
So, I mean, it's a $65 billion intellectual property suit. So let's start with the big number so everybody can understand what's at stake here. Ultimately, what's going on is that Craig Wright. So I'm going to give you the Steelman Craig Wright version. Okay, so Craig created Bitcoin, wrote the white paper, asked Dave Kleiman for some help. Dave Kleiman was a partner in a company called W&K Info Technologies or something like that. It was like a cybersecurity development firm and doing some forensic auditing work and some of the other stuff that they both were involved in. So they were business partners and they were friends. But the Bitcoin white paper or the Bitcoin project precedes their business partnership by quite a bit. And Craig ultimately tried to outsource some of his work, which again, Bitcoin was his side project, but tried to outsource some of this work to Dave to help with. As I understand it, Dave didn't really do much with it. He may have contributed something, the degree of which we do not understand.
The work on Bitcoin is what they're alleging.
On Bitcoin specifically, yeah. Like, hey, Dave, you're my friend and I've got this project and I would like you to work on it. Can you do X, Y, and Z? And as I understand it, Dave did not do a lot of what he was asked because it was a favor project, So I think it was like, hey, I'm busy. We got work to do. Dave was himself paralyzed from a motorcycle accident, and he was not well. He died in 2013 under circumstances that are a little bit unclear, but it looks like he died of an infection based on the fact that he was unable to move his body around and probably died of complications from bed sores. But he lived alone and died alone in 2013. His brother, or actually it's his stepbrother, I don't believe they have any blood relation, claims to have been the executor of his estate and that Dave made it very clear that he was a 50-50 partner in Satoshi Nakamoto, and therefore all of Satoshi Nakamoto's assets are 50% the product of, or are the property of the Kleiman estate. That Dave deserves 50% of the Bitcoins that are the property of Satoshi Nakamoto because he was 50% of Satoshi Nakamoto. Craig vehemently disagrees, and this is really what this case is going to be about. The coins in contention is one.
So sorry, to make this clear, because this is a point that when a lot of people comment on this case, they don't make the point that Ira is claiming that Craig Wright is Satoshi, and that as Satoshi, he owns the Kleiman estate money.
Yes. Okay,
so that's it in a nutshell. Okay.
So then with that, they've been fighting for years. Craig, after Dave died, there's a couple of emails that have been circulated publicly. People have seen them, of Craig writing an email to Dave, I believe it was to Dave Kleiman's father, stating something to the effect of like, hey, make sure not to destroy any of Dave's hard drives. Like, they probably have Bitcoin files on them, which are worth quite a bit of money. And I would like to, help you claim Dave's Bitcoin. It seems like Ira probably just reformatted those drives and it destroyed Dave's Bitcoin. This was Dave's Bitcoin, not Satoshi's Bitcoin, very specifically. But it also, I think it seems like Ira then realized, oh, this Bitcoin actually has some value here, and probably learned probably essentially read Dave's emails and figured out some stuff about the Satoshi history, and then did a little research and said, holy crap, there's some real value here. And it looks like my brother was helping with Bitcoin. Let's see if we can get those coins out of Craig, because Craig obviously has them somewhere. Then we've got the Tulip Trust, which is, as Craig alleges it, he created a trust in order to hold onto those coins so that Craig could not be threatened. It's like, what do you do with Bitcoins? If everybody knows you're Satoshi, they know you're worth $60 billion. Like, there's a lot of motivation to, kick your door in and put a shotgun in your mouth and say, hey, give me your Bitcoins, right? So he created this trust structure in order to make it that he can't give you his Bitcoins as a safety measure for himself and his family and his other interests and things. But what this lawsuit is going to determine a bunch of stuff about the history of Bitcoin. I've seen the evidence list. I don't know what's in the list, but I've seen the titles of every item in the evidence list, and holy crap, is this going to be explosive. There's papers about time chain technology from 2007. There's sealed Craig Wright dissertations that precede Bitcoin, but allegedly have whole paragraphs that made it into the Bitcoin white paper. There are receipts that are likely receipts from buying domain names like bitcoin.org in 2008, these kind of things. But then there's hidden witnesses, there's secret witnesses, there's stuff that nobody's going to see until we see it. We know that guys like Andreas Antonopoulos are there to testify on behalf of Kleiman for whatever reason, which I believe doesn't. I'm very curious to hear what he's there for, because Kleiman is trying to prove that Craig is Satoshi, but I think it's very clear that Antonopoulos would be someone there to prove that Craig is not.
Okay, so Andreas is going to be testifying that Craig is not Satoshi?
I don't actually know what his testimony is for. He is being brought in as a Bitcoin expert to be interviewed by the attorneys in front of the jury. So I think it's going to be, how does Bitcoin work? And, in your opinion, Andreas Antonopoulos. But it's interesting because Andreas is
okay,
a very anti-Craig guy.
Andreas is going to be part of this. He's a big name in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And they're not talking about this on all crypto media channels. Like, what the fuck is going on? See, that's why I brought you here. I didn't even know that part. That is so messed up, dude.
Yep.
Why aren't people talking about this? Because look, there's this thing, Kurt, that libertarians, we don't really like to deal with government, obviously. Like, who does? You know, no one does.
Yeah. Nobody
Everyone
really
hates-
does.
And no one does. Everyone hates the DMV.
Everyone's a libertarian when they're standing in line at the DMV.
Yeah. So that's true. It is. The thing is that a lot of what happened in Bitcoin history with these civil wars revolved around the use of libertarian rhetoric. And someone and then obviously not every libertarian is libertarians at large are not a monolith of people. You know, you have agorists, you have voluntarists, you have objectivists, right? You have people that are more left-leaning libertarians, like Antonopoulos himself, you know, who is much more on the I don't know. I don't even. Some people would even consider him a libertarian, but he would claim to be libertarian, you know. But he's very SJW-like, you know. So everyone is using libertarian rhetoric to their benefit, it seems, around here. So it just, that makes no sense that there's such a media blackout regarding this case. It's almost as if the predominant narrative is BSV's dead, it doesn't matter. Fake Toshi, Craig Wright is fake Toshi. Game over. We won. And it's like, no, wait a minute. If I personally see a lot of innovation happening on BSV, regardless of what's happening with this case or Craig Wright's identity. BSV as a technology is freaking awesome. Like I've said many times already, even within this, you know, this conversation with you. So it does matter. It's not dead. It's still alive. It's still something that matters in crypto. But there is a blackout that is concerning. It's very concerning. Why does this matter? Why does this case matter? As far as I know, like from a, you know, I could say that this case in itself is just something that belongs to someone's personal life. It's none of my business. Sure, it's a big IP. It's IP lawsuit, right? It's what you define it as. Okay, so it's still none of my business. But why does it matter to crypto? Why does it matter to everyone else? What do you expect to come out of this case?
So, I mean, the blockchain economy, the crypto trader economy, and all these different things, the investment culture and all of these things are predicated on this notion that Satoshi Nakamoto wanted the world to have an asymmetric store of value that is BTC. Like, they have co-opted Satoshi Nakamoto and turned him into this cult hero for this narrative about having a distributed savings account, right? And that's the most disruptive thing in the universe, and everyone needs to buy.
At the Crypto Vigilante, we don't believe that. We think it's Monero.
That's fair, but it's still, you know, I mean, people come to you guys for investment advice too. Like, people look at it and they say, "Here's an investment opportunity. I'm going to hold coins and be rich someday," and that's a very sexy and compelling sales pitch.
Yes and no. Because
I don't want to pigeonhole your
no. Because of course that is what we do is that we help people discover themselves in a way. Are you a day trader? Are you an investor,
Sure.
like you just said? Even better, are you an entrepreneur? And if you want to build, I tell everyone the best place to build, objectively speaking, is BSV. If you want to build on a privacy setting, well, maybe wait for something like Darrow to launch, right? But that's another story.
So there's this culture that has grown out of the, you know, the last 12 years of Bitcoin, and it's this culture that it's good news that MasterCard made an announcement this week that everyone's going to be able to transact cryptocurrency over the MasterCard network. Like, that's some kind of disruption. Or just any of the other things, like Shiba Inu coin has gone up 60 million% in the last whatever, you know. So, like, these are the victories. This is what's changing the world. And, you know, Craig has been a public figure now as Craig Wright in Bitcoin since 2014. He started showing up at Australian Bitcoin meetups and talking about fintech disruption and, you know, some of these other things you could do with Bitcoin. And people have been telling him he's wrong. He's wrong. He's wrong. He was on stage with Nick Szabo talking about the Turing completeness of the Bitcoin stack and why we don't need Ethereum. And Nick Szabo's saying, you're wrong. That's not how that works. And, you know, Craig has been on a lot of stages where a lot of people with a lot of money have laughed him off the stage, kicked him out, called him a fraud, and said, you don't understand Bitcoin. You don't understand Bitcoin. This is not what Bitcoin is for. Use Ethereum, use BTC, use whatever. Do anything but what Craig Wright says. And if at the end of this month, there is definitive proof, and this isn't even what the case is about. It's not about definitively proving Satoshi Nakamoto's identity, but if at the end of this, there is now public record of, let's even say 2 new things that prove that Craig Wright was working on Bitcoin in 2008. that changes the whole narrative. All of a sudden, he goes from very publicly like, that fake Toshi fraud guy to, Craig Wright wrote the white paper.
Or
Craig Wright is,
at the very least, it could be. He could be. That question is there. Yes, you're right.
And so, and then that would mean that anybody who actually cares about Bitcoin as a technology is then going to say, everyone told me not to listen to that guy, that guy was a fraud, and they were wrong. So what does that mean about all the decisions I've made about Bitcoin over the last several years? So then it forces people to revisit all of these things, everything that's happened over the last several years now. And then what it says is that, oh my goodness, what he's been saying about Bitcoin and what he has now implemented in BSV and all of these other things are what BTC was supposed to be. How much of, the stuff that I've been saying, the subversion of Bitcoin, all these things that people are like, that's a conspiracy theory. All of a sudden, all of that stuff is back on the table.
What Jeff Berwick said, what we've been saying. And you know what? At the Crypto Vigilante, we've given you guys both sides of the story. If you're a subscriber, Mr. X he's completely on the other side, but he's someone that is logically consistent. So he sees the BTC desire to be fully manifested in Monero. And he's giving you author Arthur Van Pelt's understanding of Craig Wright being fake Toshi, Jameson Lopp's research on Craig Wright being fake Toshi. So we've given both perspectives. But me personally, I've gone on the record many times, and I'll go in it again. I completely agree with Craig Wright on what Bitcoin was supposed to be. It's the Bitcoin I fell in love with. Bitcoin, to me, was never supposed to be a privacy coin because it can't be a privacy coin. That's why we had to start from scratch with CryptoNote and now have Monero and Pirate Chain, But that's because things have to be done with its intention with its purpose and its intention. First thing is intention is a lasting in execution, like any good architect would know. The first thing that is intended is the last thing that is the last thing that is executed, right? So therefore, if you're going to build something, you have to build right from scratch. And Bitcoin was never a privacy coin, but what I understood as Bitcoin was this machine of innovation, which is what Mike Hearn said, Gavin, what all my buddies were saying back in the day when we all fell in love with Bitcoin and we all wanted to build on Bitcoin as entrepreneurs. And what Craig Wright has been saying. So I don't care. I don't know about his identity. To me, that's secondary. Honestly, it doesn't matter. I judge people by their proof of work, and based on the proof of work of BSV, I judge that, dude, this technology is fucking awesome. And this is what I fell in love with. This is the Bitcoin I came to love, So yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. And so, reigniting this conversation, according to the small blockers, the BTC people and the BCH people, the Bitcoin civil war is over. It was won handily by the BTC people, and BTC is Bitcoin, period. What this case could do is reignite and say, holy cow, the Bitcoin civil war isn't over at all. And all of a sudden that there is a massive contention for who should have the most SHA-256 proof of work and all of these different things. It flips a lot of people's narratives on its head. And frankly, that's a little bit scary. I have to think about my safety again. what did Mike Hearn go through? You know, all of a sudden, if we're back in contention that this war is heating back up, like, what does that mean for someone like me who's been saying all of these things that you know, like I've been a joke to a lot of people because we haven't really been a real threat because BSV hasn't been like stealing market share from BTC. But if we start stealing a bunch of market share and hash power and all these different things from BTC again, well, then all of a sudden, all of a sudden stuff starts getting real spicy again.
But, you know, take solace in the fact that us people that have followed Bitcoin's original design from day one, we are the most seasoned warriors in all of Bitcoin and all of crypto history. We've been through 2 hash wars, and we're still at it, and we're focusing on what, in my opinion, matters most: proof of work entrepreneurship on chain. And that's something that, you know, no one can take away, is the fact that at the very least, this experiment exists in the market and is not going anywhere. It's been proven that it's not going anywhere. And what this case is magnifying is only going to make people look at something that is already working. And people are going to be like, oh my gosh, what do you mean the more you use the blockchain, the cheaper transaction fees are, right? What do you mean you can do smart contracts on Bitcoin? Actually, yeah, dude, we try to tell you that from day one. You can do smart contracts on Bitcoin. Really? Yeah. What do you mean you can have DAOs on Bitcoin? Like you're part of Gorilla DAO, right?
I am.
Like, tell us about Gorilla DAO real quick.
So Gorilla DAO is, you know, just like a DAO on many other places. It's an issuance of tokens. You buy the tokens at a fixed rate, and then the tokens give you a certain amount of vote weighted to how many tokens you have. So somebody that has 10 tokens has 10 times as many votes as somebody who has 1 token. And ultimately what the DAO does is vote on what to do with the DAO's money. And so it does all kinds of things. It's minted NFTs. It's minted some actual physical precious metals coins for safekeeping and investment purposes. And it also helped create the Gorilla Pool. So the Gorilla Pool is a mining pool on BSV, which mined a block today, usually mines at least 1 block a day. And sometimes when our hash power goes up, we're mining 10 blocks a day. But DAO allows the collectivization of a civic organization to participate in anything. It allows us to vote with our keys, vote with our tokens, participate in structures that can only be done in the blockchain space. And something like a DAO can be done on Ethereum too, but man, doing a transaction on Ethereum right now for a vote, they're expensive. $80, $100, $500, depending on traffic. Every time I vote in Gorilla DAO, it's less than a penny because I'm voting with a token that is built on BSV, and so that's it's a unique thing there too. But there are so many things like that where the globe can participate. You know, this is the kind of thing where somebody in sub-Saharan Africa, if they can get a internet connection, they can participate in tokenomics because it's 1,000th of a penny to transact a token or prove their identity with a token. And that's disruptive. Like, that's the kind of thing that changes the world. And I'm here for it.
So we've been talking about how the hash war never ended, right? And who said that it was supposed to last 5 days? You know, it can last 100 years. But, you know, Bitcoin is not just competition. It's not just war. Bitcoin's also about love and cooperation. And something very beautiful happened a couple days ago where Gavin Andreessen said that that logical conclusion of BTC is that the chain itself, BTC chain, in the future, somewhere in the future, the economic incentives will come to a halt, and that BTC will only exist as a token on other networks, whether it be the Lightning Network or or just another blockchain itself. I'm beginning to think, and because I had that conversation with a couple people, including yourself, and this is actually, you said this to me. You said, I think what Gavin is trying to say is that BTC, because I personally think that, like, when it comes to proof of work, BSV, Bitcoin's original design, is it. You said that pretty much the only way to save BTC as a unit of account will be through Bitcoin itself.
Yep.
In Bitcoin's original design, where the miners are expanded, like we have it, you know, where we can take in all the data from BTC, so BTC can keep going on. So in a sense, Bitcoin can be the savior of Bitcoin, right? Which is kind of beautiful,
Sure.
that I know that everyone talks about, this contention, but is there a chance that we can see actual, like, an olive branch, extended in the future, where people are like, you know what, in BSV, we use the miners in whatever way we best see fit in the market. There's no one telling us what to transact on chain. And here, let's put the Bitcoin BTC blockchain on BSV because it fits. And
I mean, it can absolutely be done
by miners all over again.
Right. I mean, there's not a reason not to. I mean, the BTC people would laugh at that today, but if the economics change, and they're big BTC holders and they still want there to be value in BTC, or the market still values BTC to some degree after the fact, it's just like anything else. Like you can tokenize anything. Like should we tokenize the rye stones from the Isle of Yap on BSV? It's like we can. So, but is there demand? In fact, that's a really interesting use case. We should reach out to the Yap people and see if they want to resurrect their monetary system on BSV, because it could be done. But yeah, I mean, BTC could absolutely, it could have its entire ledger transplanted. It could be put into essentially an overlay network, and BTC can function as tokens or whatever else. But I think the real question would be why. I mean, it sounds silly to me, but I guess humans do a lot of really silly things because they're weird about ownership and value, anyways. But yeah, it could absolutely be done.
Yeah, this whole topic about Craig Wright is so contentious and so draining that I honestly, I've wanted to like not pay attention to it, and I haven't really like cared for it, because what I care about is the technology and Bitcoin's original design and how it compares to the rest. That's always been my focus. And whenever I talked about BSV, I never talked about I never talk about Craig Wright. I gave you guys my perspective already. Kurt, what would you say about all these allegations about, forgeries on behalf of Craig Wright in the past? There's so many allegations from small blockers that, Craig Wright forged this document, forged that document, that he's a master forger. And there's just like, evidence after evidence that he's fake documents here, fake documents there. What are your thoughts on that? What's your perspective on that?
I think, well, for one, I think people need to get comfortable with the fact that Craig Wright could be Satoshi Nakamoto and also be a liar. Those are not mutually exclusive things. There's a reason, the phrase exists saying, you never want to meet your heroes, or also like, you don't want to watch the butcher make the sausage, right? Some of these things are like, I wish I didn't know that about this situation. That's not to say that Craig Wright is lying or has forged anything. It is possible. I don't actually know. I've seen a lot of the stuff from like the Arthur Van Pelts of the world, and some of these people that spend like a full-time job just going line for line through like everything that Craig Wright has ever done with his entire life, and looking for plagiarism and looking for stuff that's been backdated wrong or edited or whatever. And some of it's compelling, but there's no proof of work in any of that. I'm trusting one guy's timestamps versus Craig's timestamps versus this sworn document versus that sworn document. And ultimately, I'm not in a position to do the forensic auditing myself and say one way or another what is reality. I know I don't like Arthur Van Pelt. I know I disagree with his worldview, and I think that his intentions are malicious. Is he right? He could be right about some of it. And the same thing with Craig. The fact that I agree with Craig about Bitcoin doesn't necessarily mean that he's a good person even. Like, he could be a total piece of shit. He could be a serial liar and still be the creator of Bitcoin. And I think, we don't need every single person that we agree with on every single point to be an angel. Like, that's just reality. But ultimately, I think what is the most telling is that Craig continues. Two things. There are two things about his behavior that would tell me that would make me lean toward Craig, despite all of the criticisms of Craig, is that BSV is designed specifically to make it that records can never be changed, because he sees the value in an unchangeable record keeping system. So this tells me something about his mindset and the way he sees the world. And maybe it's because maybe he is a serial liar and sees the obvious benefit of, hey, we need to have a way to not let there be tampering, because people can do bad things by tampering with documents. And then the other thing, the other completely relevant thing in this situation is the fact that he's the one who keeps wanting to take this to higher and higher courts. And so if he is committing fraud at this level for all of these, I mean, let's assume he is a fraud, right? Why would he have not just said, okay, my shtick is up, like I've lost. At this point, I need to make sure that I don't end up in prison and all these different things. But he keeps, every time, even when he loses things, he says, well, let's bring it to the next highest court. And I mean, he's clearly willing to go to the high court in England or to the American Supreme Court and bring this stuff up and say, look at what I've created, look at what I've done, and look at the frauds around me that are trying to take it away from me. And so, I don't know, those two things, those are not the behavior of a fraud. Like somebody trying to create fraud-proof, proof of work backed permanent data, and then somebody who's willing to put it up to the scrutiny of higher and higher courts who have every ability to fine him, punish him, throw him in prison, and whatever else if he has defrauded, if he's been lied under oath and all these things. If it's proven that he has lied under oath about all these things, like, why hasn't he shut up? Why didn't he try to settle out of court with IRA or COPA or any of these lawsuits? Like, so then that leaves two things. He's either very confident about what he's saying is at least enough the truth that he can, that he can win, or he is a complete and utter sociopath. And I mean, he's just going to be absolutely destroyed because he has too much of an ego to admit that he's wrong, even when he's been caught in his own lie. I mean, both things are possible, but I think that it's very unreasonable, especially with all the other people involved. Like, there are good and intelligent people involved that are advisors to Craig, that are legal advisors to Craig, and all these things. That if this was made up at this point, I would certainly hope that the good people in his corner would have said, "Hey, Craig, like we need to figure out the best way to crash this plane at this point." And but that's not the case. The people that I know on the inside they're getting ready for victory parties. They're excited for things to occur under oath. They're excited for the witnesses to give their testimony and tell the real story of Bitcoin. And so, I don't know. I would expect that under intense scrutiny, some things will come up as, hey, yeah, I backdated it. I didn't remember where it came from. I actually tried to burn this in 2010 when I tried to disappear. And then the fact that it came back up, I tried to pull it back out and I couldn't pull it back out. And I retyped it, or, so it's a thing. I don't think that, I certainly don't think Craig is perfect. I think Craig's a real son of a bitch about a lot of things, but it doesn't mean he's not Satoshi. And I'm excited to see all of this come out in the wash, frankly.
Yeah. I don't know about his personal life at all. I don't care. I have to remain as objective as possible, even as an analyst and the team as well. So even if my objectivity leads for me to be in contention with my own team, so be it. And that's fine, because we're here to dialogue with each other and learn from one another. Mm-hmm. If he is or if he isn't, and BSV ceases to be the pure proof of work coin that we want it to be, I'm gonna have to call it out. That's just my job, right? What I see here, the big problem here, Kurt, is that there is this underlying assumption that, and it comes from Craig Wright, and it comes from a lot of people that frankly understand government law better than I do. Mm-hmm. And it's the premise that if you can prove it in law, therefore is true. If you can prove it in law, it's therefore it is then true. Sure. I'm very skeptical, and I have no legal training. I don't know about that, but my immediate reaction is, gosh, government is corrupt. The legal system is corrupt.
Yeah.
If you have money, you could probably just, buy things out, and just bleed people in court. Because if you look at like what happened with like Bitcoin with the Cobra guy and what's the other guy's name? The from what Bitcoin did, what's his name?
McCormick, yeah.
It seems like these guys didn't even put a fight, like because they were like, oh shit, this guy has a lot more money than us. He's just gonna bleed us. He's just gonna drain us in court with legal fees. So we're just gonna not even fight it. And so it's almost like does court really prove something? Is it something that we can really trust? I mean, I know you're not a legal expert yourself, but that's something that's still, I know for a fact, whether you are pro or con, pro or against the whole situation here, whatever side you fall under, that's always going to be a counter argument,
Sure.
So even if they say, no, yeah, according to this court, to this case, it's, here we have some documents that prove that Craig Wright was Satoshi. People are going to say, well, of course, the system is corrupt. Don't trust that, so right. Will it necessarily change the optics regarding BSV?
I mean, I guess we'll see. I think the real one is, everybody wants to see him sign a message as Satoshi or move coins. I think that's an inadequate proof. And I think this goes both directions. So courts can be corrupt. The law is written by fallible people. It's enforced by fallible people. And the truth in a courtroom is determined by fallible people. A jury of 10 will frankly decide the fate of this case. And who's to say that all 10 are not malicious or, ignorant, incapable in some regard. But this is also the reality that we live in. I'm an idealist in many regards. I'm hopeful about human action and human behavior, and it makes me hopeful about Bitcoin. It makes me hopeful that good people that recognize their own imperfections can submit themselves to being fixed by proof of work, for example. But that's actually what the legal system was based on too. The legal system as it stands in the United States today is the product of libertarian thought from about 500 years ago. It was people saying, you know what? The kings are corrupt, and ultimately the feudal lords shouldn't decide my fate or my property rights and all these different things. And so the court system today is a product of libertarians fighting for there to be more rights, to involve more people in the process and say, hey, we need a group of normal people to vet this for normalcy and say, like, whether or not a jury has the ability to nullify, for example, and say, you know what? I don't like that law, and therefore I find this person not guilty. And these are tools that I would like to see made obsolete. I think that these things should be made obsolete through the progress that we make. And I think Bitcoin can be a cornerstone of that.
I completely agree with you. Yes. It's still the best technology that we have in dispute resolution, unfortunately.
Right.
It's still the best technology that we have. Do we want for there to be cryptographic law akin to mercantile law, where we have a competing legal system to that of the state? Yeah, we would want things to be better. I
think it could be part of it, and that's the thing. Is like it's the perfect example is who owns a car? Is it the person with the keys, or is it the person with the title? And that's crucial, because everybody says not your keys, not your coins, but that's not the case. They're my damn coins, even if you stole my keys. Like, you may move them, you may successfully rob me, but those are my coins. And that's something that arbitration, that's something that truly a third party needs to look at and say, no, you're the bad guy. Like, you have robbed him, you have wronged this person, and you need to give that person that thing back. And maybe you can't give it back on the ledger. Maybe you can't reverse a transaction, for example, but you do owe him that property back. And so that's a problem right there that Bitcoin, as it's implemented today, can't solve. And we're in the cypherpunk world that has begun to be solved with BISC, Havano Desk, Local Monero, Agora Desk.
So there has been attempts, but it's not a full-fledged legal
and
system.
it's imperfect, right? It's very limited in scope, and right now it's a both and. Like what would I like to see? Like how would I like to see Craig Wright prove that he's Satoshi Nakamoto? My hope, we watch this whole trial. We get to see tons of evidence that we've never seen. We get to hear the testimonies of people who maybe know things that I've never heard before because they've been held very close to the vest. And at the end of the trial, to have Craig Wright say, and I'm going to move some of the, I'm going to move Satoshi coins out of these 10 addresses, proving that he has had the keys the whole time. Like, that's the champagne moment right there. That's when my diet goes out the window. I'm going to go have some beers with my friends and say, holy damn.
Okay. See, that's the thing. And I actually agree with you. And I agree with Craig Wright on this, that keys don't represent identity. That identity needs to be established outside of having the keys themselves. Could you please expound on that a little bit? And what would be the counter argument to that, just for the sake of having a very broad perspective here?
The counter argument is plainly code is law, and that, hey, if you can figure out how to steal someone's stuff because they improperly secured it, then it's your stuff. And it's a very Darwinian, the toughest guy or the smartest guy or whatever. It allows the smartest guy to be the toughest guy. So I understand
it's
why.
Ultimate property rights, though, if you think about it from that perspective.
It is, and it's an interesting thought experiment, but it's itself
reality too, because all of the entire the world history has shown us that if you're not capable of securing your private property and protecting your private property, someone else is going to come and they're going to knock you outside the head and take your private property. That has been the entire history of civilization, is groups of people taking over other people. That's why it's so important to have to be able to secure your own private property.
Yeah, for sure.
No,
I agree. It's so something like
so there is an argument to be made from the BTC Monero perspective that is valid, right? That if you get your keys stolen, then no longer are those your keys. But the question that I'm asking here is, does the key represent my identity?
Not if it's not in your hand, and so I think it is an aspect of identity. You can't anywhere at all.
So you have to. So this
Period.
is the Craig Wright argument: is that you have
face
to establish
face to face. Me and you've been friends for years, right? You've been in my house. You came to my family's. You came to my son's baby shower and all. Like, we are friends. But every time I see you, how do I know that it's you? How do I know that you're Rafael? Answer me that. Can you prove to me 100% that you're Rafael when we're face to face?
I don't understand this question, honestly. It sounds a little bit like philosophical. I don't understand the question.
It is philosophical. Why is it philosophical? Because identity is philosophical. Here's the thing. So we have, for example, like this transgender movement. This is my body is imprisoning my identity. My body isn't my identity. My body looks like a man's body, but I'm a woman. And so I'm changing my name. I'm changing the way that I express so it's all these things. So now we've gotten to the point in culture where our identity can't even be proven, because we can't even establish that I am the same person on an hourly basis. I may be a different person in an hour than I was before. And there's arguments to be made that we are anyways, like cell reproduction and all these different things, right? So it comes to the question, who is Rafael? Is Rafael Rafael's body? Is it Rafael's mind? Is it Rafael's soul or spirit or whatever you want to call it? Or is it a collective of all this? Does it have to be all at once? Or let's say 100 years in the future, people are going to look back at this video and say, that was Rafael. Like, I can still feel his energy, his spirit, because I can see him in video, or I can read the things that he wrote. That's his identity. I feel his identity. His identity still exists somewhere.
Right, so but your identity, insofar, what we're talking about here is identity in correlation to private property, identity belonging to me, and that which comes out from me is private property that represents
Yes,
who I am.
I agree. So I
Right?
agree.
So
I agree that I agree with all of that. But what I'm saying is, so like you, for example, this even comes down to questioning whether or not you even exist, right? We can start to have like these very weird esoteric conversations about identity, but that's not what we do in law. In law, we take a very practical approach. And I take a very practical, like if you were to knock on my door, I would let you in. I would not assume, okay, Rafael is some pod person at my door and his brain has been taken over by some entity. I would see you, I'd say, hey, Raf, you'd come in my door, we'd have dinner, we'd do whatever we do, right? I'm not going to vet every cell in your body, every molecule, and make sure that you're actually Rafael, because that's absurd, right? And so it's the exact same thing with identity as keys, right? So it's like, if you're going to sign with a key, it depends on the value of what you're signing. If you're just signing with a key to do some arbitrary thing, like prove that you have right to access a low security building, who cares, right? Keys are identity in that situation. However, if it's like, hey, I'm here to pull the plug on my spouse, who's in a coma. It's my job as my spouse to do this for my wife. And so how much identity do I need to prove that I have the right to pull the plug on somebody, to let them die because we had some pre-existing contract that it was my job to let my spouse die? Well, that's going to take a little bit more vetting of the identity, right? It can't just be, well, here's my Bitcoin. This key says I'm allowed to kill this person. And so it needs to be like, hold on, like let's triple. You need 3 forms of identification, and there's a 10-hour waiting period because we're going to triple check it all, right? And so there are different levels of identity verification that are relevant for varying levels of access to the property of that identity. And so in a situation where it's $65 billion worth of Bitcoin and the entire fate of the entire Bitcoin narrative, no, keys moving coins, I guarantee if Craig were to move a coin today, the narrative would shift hard. And
why
it would
doesn't
be,
he just do that?
in my opinion, the reason he doesn't do that is because the narrative would turn immediately into Craig stole those keys from Satoshi. That's it. That's the next direction it goes. So what do you have to do first? You have to establish your case. It needs to be, okay, here's this proof and that proof and this proof and that proof. And I need you to agree that these, 10 or 12 or 50 things are all valid, or at least discernible enough as probably valid, and then I'm going to use the keys as the identity that we've spent the last 20 days or whatever establishing, or in Craig's situation, the last 7 years establishing that he is the identity of Satoshi Nakamoto. And if at that point he moves those coins, then no one can say, well, Craig just robbed Satoshi or killed Satoshi and has his keys because Craig's a prick. Because if we can get down that road, then it's that much more powerful. It's that much harder for somebody to say, it's still probably a scam, and here's why and how.
So have you heard of the theory that well, I think the theory is of I think a guy in Europe that's in prison that supposedly Craig Wright help catch him and put him in prison, and he was this guy LaRoux, yeah, and that LaRoux is really Satoshi, and that Craig Wright was part of the team that caught him, and that and that LaRoux that all of these things that prove LaRoux to be Satoshi were stolen. I don't know. It's just, I'm asking you about this theory. It's the first thing that came into mind in regards to identity, because this is a rabbit hole, right? And it's important to talk about all options, right? What do you know about LaRoux? Thoughts on LaRoux?
Paul LaRoux was a bunch of things. He was an anarchist and a criminal. He was involved in the trafficking of all kinds of illegal things, guns and drugs, and I think he was involved in some human trafficking and all kinds of stuff. We know Craig was a forensic auditor, basically an accountant, but like a really high-level accountant, digging into crime in order to try to track down these sorts of criminals. It seems like what was redacted, and this leaked out of a court case, that it looks like Craig actually helped put LaRoux in prison by doing that work in forensic auditing and proving that he was this crook. So people look at that and they say, well, Craig figured out that LaRue is Satoshi and has now assumed his identity because he knows Paul LaRue can't fight him back from prison. I think that that's a really narrow way. You have to ignore a lot of problems with the theory about Paul being Satoshi, not the least of which there's no actual evidence. It's all just very circumstantial. It's like, oh, Paul was into cryptography and Paul knew how to program, therefore Paul is Satoshi. Like it's a very it just doesn't work. There's also, as I recall, a lot of situations where he was in places, like we know for a fact, like due to like his court cases that put him ultimately in prison, that he was in certain places at certain times while Satoshi Nakamoto was doing things like, just chatting on bitcoin.org, for example. So that's a big one. I think the other one is that Paul LaRue is not English and like English or British speaking. And one of the key things about Satoshi Nakamoto is that Satoshi used a lot of British idioms, like saying bloody as an adjective, for example, is not something Paul LaRue would have done. So it's like, well, but that's also circumstantial. I think the evidence for Paul LaRue being Satoshi is very, very thin. In fact, every time I ask people, like, well, what proof do you have? And the response is always, well, he was good at software and Craig can't code. And that's there's lots of software developers out there. Like a software developer who is a criminal does not make a good Satoshi candidate necessarily. So I don't know. I don't think much of the theory. I never thought much of it. I actually think it's more evidence that, Craig looking into human trafficking and auditing money, like that was his job. He was a money auditor in order to stop filthy people from doing terrible things. And like, that's what Bitcoin does. Like, this is the kind of relevant experience that would make one say like, hey, maybe we should have a publicly available money that like, disincentivizes human trafficking, for example. So, I'm sure there's LaRue. I'm not a LaRue expert. I don't know his whole history. So maybe there's other pieces of evidence, but other people who I've talked to have not had any evidence outside of he was a C++ coder and, kind of fits the profile of somebody that could in theory be Satoshi, but I don't like the theory.
Okay. So what you're saying then is that, you hope that is this the only case that is happening right now? I know there's the Copa case as well, right?
There's plenty coming up. I'm actually going to have to leave right at the top of the hour because I have another call that I have to hop on. So this is our 12-minute warning here. But
guys, we're going to have more of these discussions. I'm going to bring people from the other side of the, what do you call it? The other side of the story. Yep. To talk about this, and I'll bring Kurt back because no one else is talking about this. This is like so important, like what's happening right now. It's very important and no one's talking about it. So I guess we're going to talk about it.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So tell me, what were you saying?
So there is the Copa case. The Copa is the Crypto Open Patent Alliance. That includes MicroStrategy, which is Michael Saylor's company. Excuse me. It includes Coinbase and a bunch of other, the usual suspects, the same people involved. Square Crypto is another big one in Copa. But what they're doing,
Twitter, right? That's Twitter.
Twitter, yeah. Twitter. Square is also, they have their own BTC development team, and they're a Lightning Network research incubator and stuff as well. So clearly not allies to Craig Wright, but they are suing. They're trying to prove definitively in court that Craig is not Satoshi Nakamoto, and that, which I don't know how you even go about attempting to prove a negative in court as your claim. So that strikes me as pretty silly, right on its face. There's also the outcomes of the case against Peter McCormick, which is still ongoing. They're looking to come to some settlement agreement. And then there's a couple other cases that are kind of sitting in limbo where like there were some jurisdictional issues and maybe they've been dropped, but maybe they could be reopened. But there's a lot of people that still want to get a piece of flesh out of Craig Wright, and Craig's happy for him. Every time they come up, I go, do we really want to fight against Square and Coin? Like, these are other multi-billion-dollar organizations. Like, and Craig is always like, yes, I got them. They're gonna make me bring out more evidence. okay, Craig. So there's plenty to come. Ownership of the protocol, ownership of the white paper. The UK government recognizes Craig Wright legally as the copyright holder for the Bitcoin white paper. He wants to see that across more jurisdictions. He's very keen to show that BTC has been illegally passing itself off as Bitcoin while actually being essentially a fork. And a bunch of other things. So there's a lot to come. There's also been rumors of like class action suit for all BSV holders, because BSV holders have just been plainly attacked and oppressed by the same group, like Coinbase and Gemini and Binance and all the, Binance specifically delisting, people like Gemini saying, oh, what's BSV? We would never list that. Ha, 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 ha.
I mean, Crypto Vigilante and Dollar Vigilante get DDoS attacked every time I talk about BSV. So sorry, back end guys. It's going to happen again when this comes out, but it's all good. I'm used to it. It's no big deal. But so what's with the COPA? Where are we with COPA? Has that case started, or is it just being announced?
We know it's happening. It's early days. I know that one of the big things that they're excited about is the preliminary evidence hearings, basically. So
has it started?
No,
the way that...
as I understand it, none of it has started yet. But the first big step will be basically a meeting of attorneys and a preliminary passing back and forth of evidence. So it's like, okay, here's what we'll be bringing, and based on what that evidence is, COPA's lawyers will go back and make a recommendation to COPA, like, hey, you should settle, or hey, we should sue the pants off this guy. So we'll see. So it's a bunch of interesting stuff.
So in other words, this is about to get really exciting. Grab your popcorn.
Yep.
Yeah, I know you're like the only reporter in all of crypto that's following this. No one else from the other side is following it or giving it any attention, which is weird, right? You would think that the other side is, the anti-Craig Wright side is following it closely, but they're not. So I find myself like in the middle, like I don't care.
As a headline,
talk about it.
And Andreas Antonopoulos called to the stand in $65 billion Bitcoin lawsuit. Like, why isn't that a headline anywhere?
Right.
So, yep.
Okay. Well, I guess Crypto Vigilante, this is another reason to be with you guys and to talk more about crypto. Yeah, we'll have you back, Kurt. Let's talk more about this. I'm going to bring in people from the other side as well. And hopefully my teammates, which disagree completely with me on BSV, from a technical perspective and economic perspective, will jump on as well. I invite them to jump on as well. Mr. A, Mr. W, Mr. Z, all the misters, to be here with me and talk about all these things. Yeah, let's do it. Kurt, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Raf.
And this was great. Yeah, thank you for sticking to your guns, because you have literally taken upon yourself to really put yourself out there for what you believe in, and that is very inspiring to me and to a lot of people. So thank you for being you, man. That it has been awesome to witness.
I appreciate it very much. I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate you keeping it real with me for all these years, talking about all this stuff, and just for being a friend in a lot of ways, but for really being an ally to Bitcoin and putting yourself out there too. I mean, I can vouch for it not being easy to say, hey, you know what, the unpopular thing might be the best thing.
Honestly, me talking about this is bad for business.
Yeah.
Because BSV has so many enemies, and you've talked about them from MasterCard to Twitter. It's like, it's crazy how BSV is attacked. This is just Bitcoin's original design, but here it is, the most attacked cryptocurrency on the planet. But I don't care, because it's the Bitcoin I fell in love with, and I'm going to keep talking about it.
Yeah.
That's all there's to it.
I appreciate it, man. And thanks for having me on. Thanks for everything else. Just good to be here. I will be doing daily coverage. So I'm going to be at the November, the whole court case. So there will be a lunchtime and a nighttime live stream update from me every single day that there's court. So stay tuned. Whatever the fireworks are, I will be the guy breaking all the fireworks to everybody live from outside the courthouse.
Nice. And this is going to be on your YouTube channel, right? CoinGeek?
It's going to be on CoinGeek's channel. I don't know how far it's going to get syndicated. We're working with other places who are interested in syndicating. So if we can spread it far and wide, we're here to do it. We want everybody to hear the story.
You don't think that Cointelegraph and CoinDesk will have a correspondent there on the ground?
I doubt it.
You don't think so? You doubt it?
We'll see.
We'll see. I would be surprised. Whatever.
Yeah.
But these things need to be talked about. I don't understand the blackout. This is important. All right. Peace, love, anarchy, everyone. Thank you for your time, Kurt.
Thanks, Raf. Bye-bye.
Financial slavery is a bitch because it doesn't let you think. That's the whole point. Don't give you time to think. If you want to really learn philosophy, you need leisure. Leisure. Crypto is here to give you the leisure so you can think.